ESPN. I'm your host, Mike Gill. What's going on, everybody? It's one of those days where there's so much in play. Where do you guys want to start? I know what's on my mind was how dominant Joel Embiid was last night. I mean, can you talk about anything more? Joel Embiid, 36 points, 26 minutes, absolutely dominating last night. The way Joel Embiid is playing right now, the window is here for the Philadelphia 76ers. There's no question about it. Joel Embiid is playing at a championship level. I said it yesterday here on the Sports Bash. I'll say it again. There's 5 players that can win an NBA championship right now. There's 5. And I said yesterday, Jokic could be one of them. The problem is last night, Murray had tore his ACL, and he's now out for the season. So that kind of means Jokic doesn't have the help. So there's 5. He was the 6th guy, Jokic, and I'm a big fan of his. So I think that Nikola Jokic is good enough to do it. I don't know that the team around him is good enough to do it. They have one of those teams. Adding Aaron Gordon really changed the dynamic of that team. But to me, there's 5. It's LeBron, it's Kawhi, it's Giannis, it is KD, and it is Joel Embiid. They're the 5 guys that can win a championship. So that means there's 5 teams that can win a championship. Dame Lillard can't do it. Devin Booker can't do it. Donovan Mitchell can't do it. Jimmy Butler can't do it. Jason Tatum can't do it. That means those teams can't win a title. They are not good enough to be the best player on the best team that wins a championship. Agree or disagree? The one guy that you can throw into the mix as he could do it, the team's simply not good enough, is Steph Curry. And I have said many a times over the years that I don't think Steph Curry's on the same plane as LeBron James and Kevin Durant. It's not a knock on Steph Curry. It's just he's a smaller guy. He relies on the outside shot. You know, it's just hard. I'm not saying he's not special. He's the best shooter that we've ever seen. But at his size, there's other guys that do what he does. He's just the best at what he does. LeBron, nobody else does what he does. Durant, nobody else does what he does. Giannis, nobody else does what he does. Kawhi Leonard, he is pretty much, this is interesting, by the way, Kawhi Leonard. Do you guys feel the impact of Kawhi Leonard has been felt by the Clippers? In other words, I don't think it changed the status of the Clippers. Yeah, we think they can win a title now, but they're nowhere close to what the Lakers are still. Like, he just doesn't have the personality that brings them off the map. I was thinking about this the other night, about how when he signed with the Clippers, the thought was that the Clippers, I don't want to say would overtake the Lakers, but people would look at them differently. And I don't know that they do. Maybe it's because LeBron's out there. But you have the guys I just mentioned, and then there's Joel Embiid. I don't know. And you guys might disagree with me. Maybe you don't think Joel Embiid is good enough to be the best player on the team that wins the championship. So those, to me, are the only 5 teams that can win a title right now in the NBA. Philadelphia, the 2 LAs, Milwaukee, and Brooklyn. Brooklyn's really interesting because I don't think Harden wins a championship if he's by himself, but as the second guy, he's got a shot, obviously. But I don't think James Harden and Kyrie Irving win it together. I think they need Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant can win it with James Harden. James Harden can win it with Kevin Durant. But the underlining tie to this all is they need Kevin Durant. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think, of that list is probably 5th. I think Joel is probably 4th. And I think Durant is probably 2nd. And I think Kawhi is probably 3rd. Obviously, LeBron is number 1. That's what it is. Right now, if you're giving me the next guy of that group, and how many people agree or disagree with me? 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. They're the 5 guys that I have. I don't know that there's a 6th guy. The 6th guy to me is Nikola Jokic. The problem is he just lost his Batman. Now he's got decent, he just lost his Robins. He's got decent secondary Robins, if you will. I don't know who the next guy after Robin would be. Who would be the next guy after Robin? Like if you were to say, Jokic is Batman, Murray is Robin, who's the next guy on the superhero list that would be like Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr.? Because he does have a good third and fourth guy now.
Technically, it's Batgirl.
So Batgirl's the next incarnation of the secondary superhero.
Yeah. Because technically there's 3 different Robins, and when they get older, they just leave and he replaces them. So
right. Now, here's a comment that comes in. The Sixers don't have a Robin. Simmons, please. The Sixers Herbies, who put that in.
Yeah.
I would contend that for now, you might be right. The Sixers don't have a guy who has proven to be an adequate Robin. So that wasn't my point. My point was Joel Embiid is ready to be the best player on the team. Now, I can say that about Jokic too. That's where his point is. I said I think Jokic could be the best player on the team that wins a championship. The problem is I don't know that his secondary player going out. Now, his point, I think I can give him credit for. The Sixers have no proven Robin right now. They don't have a proven Robin.
But I don't think they're built in the typical Batman Robin sidekick setup. This isn't a traditional team that's set up the way like it was with Jokic and Jamal Murray or LeBron and Anthony Davis. I feel like the Sixers setup is a little different because to me, the way I watch Sixers games, Mike, and what do you think about this? Don't you feel like that Ben and Tobias function on a similar level in terms of what the team needs them to do? And like that Ben, he plays usually the best player on the other team defensively. He's out there orchestrating. He's a triple-double machine. Whereas Tobias, he's getting the ball a lot in those crunch time situations.
Yeah, they have kind of turned to Tobias Harris in these situations now. They have gone into a spot where Tobias Harris has kind of become a player that they are running a lot of stuff late in games for. They are going to him in moments that are suggesting. I'm not going to criticize the commenter, though. I think the Sixers not having a Robin is an accurate statement. To say Simmons, please, I think is a knock on Ben saying that he can't do it. I don't think that's accurate. I think Ben can do it, but the point that he's making is an accurate one, that right now they don't have a proven one. But what they have done all season long is they've tried to groom one. They've tried to groom Tobias Harris to be the Robin. Here's the thing. Danny Green hit a 3 last night, and then when he hit that 3, he became the Sixers' highest percentage three-point shooter this season at 41%. If Danny Green can hit 41% of his threes come playoff time, Robin isn't a necessity. The question is, can they hit at that rate? Can Seth Curry hit at the rate that he's hitting? Can he hit 40% of his threes? Can Danny Green make 40% of his threes? You're right, Josh. The Sixers have a little bit of a different setup because Embiid is the player. The other teams, Embiid's not the player. They don't have that type of player. They have a very perimeter-based team, which means the Robin has to be different. Joel Embiid, by the nature of the way he plays, their Robin's different from everybody else because Joel Embiid is so different from from Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and that group of guys. He scored last night. Kevin Kinkead's going to join us at 3:20 today for Inside the Sixers. He scored last night. He had a Euro step, a 15-foot jumper, a 1-versus-3 post-up where he split all 3 guys and got fouled. He had the Hakeem Olajuwon dream shake turnaround on the baseline. He posted up over a 6-7 combo forward. He had a 14-foot baseline jumper. He hit the Nowitzki back foot pull-up baseline jumper 3. He had a post-up turnaround baseline. Every possible way that you can think about scoring, Joel Embiid did it last night.
It's funny you mention those two players, Dirk and Hakeem, because both of them won NBA championships in a setup that was not a Batman and Robin setup. Think about it. When the Rockets won their 2 championships, who was the number 2 guy? It kind of was Robert Horry or Sam Cassell, or what? Who was it? Nobody really knows.
On which team? The Rockets?
The Rockets.
Well,
the
they had Drexler.
Wait, the second time. That was the second championship. The first one, he wasn't there. Second one was when they were the 6th seed. The first one, when he wasn't there, they basically got contributions from the whole team.
Right.
Or when you go back to Dirk, I know Jason Kidd was on the team at the time, but he was an older Jason Kidd.
Yeah, that Mavericks team was one of the few teams that doesn't fit the mold of today's superstar driven, have to have multiples. Dirk Nowitzki was a tremendous player. They didn't really have that tremendous second guy.
Right. So there are examples of teams winning championships where you don't have a Batman and Robin setup, where it's more like you have a one superstar player, and then you have other players who have specific roles and jobs on the team. You don't have to win. I know we're used to people winning with this star type of talent, but listen, I don't think that anyone's going to confuse Ben Simmons for one of the top 10 players in the league or Tobias Harris for one of the top 15, but it doesn't belittle their roles any more than what they are.
No, I think the person who put that comment in the chat is not wrong. I think it was a condescending way to say it. Simmons, please, suggesting that he can't. That is not acknowledging that Simmons can. It's does he? Will he? I thought last night Simmons played a really good game. I don't think it wasn't his best offensive output, but he was aggressive. He took the ball to the basket. He certainly played tremendous defense last night. I thought he gave Luka some issues last night, but he was not overly. He only shot the ball about 6 times, but it wasn't even him shooting so much. It's what I talk about a lot. It's him getting the deep dribble penetration and then being able to find the open man and kicking it out. And when those guys are hitting their shots, that's when the Sixers are very difficult to beat. When the Sixers are hitting their shots, Ben Simmons drives the lane, he kicks it out, and those guys get way open looks because of Ben Simmons' ability to drive. That's the big difference. Now, Ben only played 24 minutes last night. That's all they needed him for.
The other thing is, remember, if you're the Sixers team, you could argue that of the teams that you mentioned, Mike, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, and the Nets, the one thing the Sixers have that the others don't is if their best player goes down, how good are they surviving? Like, for example, to me, I don't think the Nets can win an NBA championship without Durant. We know the Lakers can't win without LeBron. I think Kawhi is way more important to the Clippers than people realize. And then Giannis, I think that goes without saying for the Bucks. So if Embiid goes down for a stretch of games, the Sixers have already shown you that they can still win games. I don't know if I had the same confidence in the other 4 teams.
Well, yeah, the Sixers are multi-dimensionally built. It's because they have 2 superstars who many believe can't coexist, yet can coexist, but can also exist on their own in a different way that they currently coexist together, if that makes sense.
No, it does, because that's how the Miami Heat were built. Remember when it was LeBron, Wade, and Bosh? Remember when Bosh went down for that while? The guys had to step up, but they were still able to carry the load without him, and then they needed him when they got to the NBA Finals that year.
Well, the Sixers are certainly built around Joel Embiid. And again, I say there's only 5 teams that can win a title. The Sixers are one of them because they have Joel Embiid. The Bucks are one of them because they have Giannis. The Nets are one of them because they have KD. And the 2 LA teams because they have LeBron and they have Kawhi. Anybody else, I don't see a path to victory because they don't have a player that can be the best player on a team that wins a championship. The difference is LeBron needs to have Anthony Davis.
Correct.
Durant has to have Harden or Kyrie or both of them, really.
Well, they need Harden more than Kyrie. Harden has been so important to that team. I mean, he literally went in there and said, you need me to run this team? I'm going to run this team.
Right.
Watch me.
Well, you got that. And then, see, this is why I feel the Bucks really, they don't have the other guy. I mean, Drew Holiday is the next best guy. Middleton's a good player. They need Giannis to do everything, essentially, or we'll have one of those two guys play out of their minds.
Yeah, you need Middleton to be firing on all cylinders from the outside to space the floor for Giannis and Drew Holiday to do their thing. If he's not hitting from the outside, you have a lot of problems. Whereas for the Sixers, you don't need Ben Simmons to be firing from the outside. Because you just mentioned earlier, Danny Green, Seth Curry. When George Hill comes back, you have other shooters who you can pass the ball to.
The Sixers have enough complementary options that Ben Simmons doesn't have to be like. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Denver. See, the problem with Denver for me is Murray is the one guy on that team that can score 35 and do it from shooting threes. Other than him, they don't have a guy that can just go bat bleep crazy and start shooting threes and going for 35, 40 points in a game. The Sixers have Joel Embiid, who scored 36 points last night. You know, the next high scorer was Korkmaz with 20. But that could easily be Milton with 20. That could easily be Harris with 25. That could easily be Danny Green with 16. That could easily be Curry with 16. They have a bunch of guys who can score the ball. It doesn't have to be Ben Simmons. I think Denver has a problem. If Murray doesn't score, they have a problem. If the Clippers, if Paul George, as we saw last year, doesn't play well, they were unable to really pick up the slack. The Sixers have guys that can pick up the slack. Now, do the Nets. Yeah, they have three guys. But what about the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh guy?
Right, because if one of those three go down, who is stepping up? Is it past their primes, Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge? I think not. I don't think they have a guy. To me, I've said this before, Mike, and what do you think about this? I don't think the Nets can win a championship without Durant and Harden and Kyrie on the floor. I think if Durant or Harden are not on the floor, that's not a championship team.
So if one of them's if
Durant or Harden is not on the floor.
Gotcha. So if it's Durant and Kyrie, you're saying they can't win with those two.
I have a lot of doubts.
I have a lot of doubts that they can win as configured. What did Ben Simmons say last night? There's only one ball and you have to play defense. I mean, think about that.
Kyrie
Ben's not wrong.
Defense.
Ben's not wrong. There's only one ball and you have to play defense. Wednesday night's going to be fun. We'll get into that. 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. Chris Hernandez is checking in, watching on Facebook. He says defense wins championships. The Sixers can lock all windows and doors when they need to. I don't think the Bucks have a bucket getter, and Brooklyn can't stop a nosebleed. Yeah, I think, look, the dynamics between Philly and Brooklyn, Morey put this team together to say, we're going to stop you defensively. That's why they went out and got a guy like George Hill. We're going to lock you down defensively. You might try to outscore us. We're going to try to stop you. We feel that we have a guy that you can't stop. Joel Embiid is the difference maker. If Joel Embiid is the MVP, Joel Embiid, I think Brooklyn's going to have a tough day at the office. But if Joel Embiid doesn't get the help, if you got cold shooters, then you have a problem. Notice I haven't mentioned Ben Simmons yet. I'm not asking Ben Simmons to come into the game tomorrow night and score 25 points. Nor should I. Because I've come to terms. You should try it. That's not who Ben Simmons is. And that's not who the Sixers want him to be. The Sixers have come to terms with it. Maybe you should too. 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Jump in there. If you're watching the show live, you can get involved on the comment section, the stream, all throughout the show today. You can hit us up on the phones, 609-573-3776. We'll take some phone calls on the other side, 609-573-3776. Every once in a while, there's a topic that comes up that I like to hear what everybody has to say on it. Do you think the Sixers team is one of those 5 teams? I say there's only 5 teams that can win a title this season. Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, Nets, and Sixers. Agree or disagree? 609-573-3776. The phones, 609-403-0973. The text, watch the show live, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and get involved in the StreamYard. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash, brought to you by Matt Blatt Kia. At Matt Blatt Kia, they want to get you approved today. Matt Blatt Kia, 6211 Black Horse Pike, Egg Harbor Township. Busy show. Frank Klose answers your Phillies questions in 20 minutes. Stick around. Download the free mobile app because I have a Sports Bash cash code word at 2:55.
Turn it on. Leave it on. The Sports Bash.
Joel catches, 3-ball left side, got it. Embiid with 6 minutes to go in the first half, catches the shot clock was under 2, and Embiid fires for 3.
That was Tom McGinnis last night. You heard it here on 97.3 ESPN. Just Embiid catching, shot clock winding down, 3-ball, bang, 7'2", 280 pounds. Yeah, he's a difference maker, I'd say. It's a lot of fun watching him. Sometimes I don't feel like we appreciate, like, I understand what the Sixers did to get him, but now that you have him, to understand that you could have been 38 and 42 and you would have never got him. Please appreciate that you have him, regardless of how you ended up getting him, whether you agree with it or not. You ever watch a team when they come into your building and you're just like, man, this team's got Jordan for 15 years, or this team's got Magic. You've got one of those guys. Enjoy it. You have one of them. It's amazing. And it's amazing to watch. That game last night, it was unbelievable. And you're watching it sometimes and you don't even notice that what this guy is doing was meant for a guy who's like 6'6", and he's 7'2", almost 300 pounds. It's pretty crazy. 609-573-3776, 609-573-3776. Let's go to Chris. He's on 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, Chris?
Hey, what's going on? How are you guys doing today?
All is well.
Yeah, I agree, except for one thing. I really don't think Embiid is the X factor, because Embiid is basically a 7'2" James Harden. I mean,
well, that's not accurate. He plays tremendous defense.
Well, no, I mean, I understand that, but I mean what he does offensively. And then with Ben Simmons, how he plays against Harden and Durant, I think is going to be key. But I think really the X factor in just the next Sixers series, it would be Doc Rivers.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, I want to hold on real sec, Chris. Chris, the one thing is, this is where people don't. Yeah. I think the Sixers have an interesting formula here. Is they have Joel Embiid, who you say is like James Harden. Guess what? I'll take that. The problem is Harden doesn't do anything on the other end of the floor, and he gives up as many points there as he scores on the other side. The Simmons dynamic is interesting because the Sixers have a guy who they can say, go full throttle down on defense because we don't really want you to. We don't need you to score on the offense. The problem is the fans want Simmons to score, and the Sixers say, go play your heart out on defense and don't worry about scoring. We got other guys that'll do that.
Yeah, I agree there. But about your Robin thing, I kind of think you're 100% right. They trained Tobias Harris to be the Robin, and I kind of agree with that. But one thing with the deep, I'm not impressed with the Brooklyn Nets. And the Kevin Durant that I've seen since coming back from the injury, I'm sorry, you're going to have to get your weight up if you're going to come and play Philly, because we're going to beat the pound on them.
All right, Chris.
Joke.
Hey, look, I hear what you're saying with the Brooklyn thing, too, is you watch them play, and they look like a little passion there from Chris. I appreciate the call. 609-573-3776 if you want to jump on. The Brooklyn thing is, how are they going to defend Joel Embiid? Forget Durant needing to put some, he hasn't played a whole heck of a lot this season, so I'll kind of wait until he gets his sea legs under him a little bit, if you will. But who's defending Joel Embiid on that team? Who? Seriously, who's defending Joel Embiid on that team? You're going to throw LaMarcus Aldridge at him? You're going to throw Nick Claxton at him? You're going to throw DeAndre Jordan, who was a DNP coach's decision the other night against the Lakers? Andre Drummond had 20 and 11 against them the other night. What is Embiid going to do to that team? Seriously, what is Joel Embiid going to do to the interior of the Brooklyn Nets? They don't have guards that want to defend. So James Harden and Kyrie, are they going to come double all night long? Seriously. And this doesn't mean that the Brooklyn Nets on Wednesday night might not, outscore the Sixers. But in a 7-game series, I think it's going to be very interesting to see the chess match of how they figure out what to do with Joel Embiid in that series. And if one of the other Sixers, Tobias Harris, I think the caller brought up the point, I'll agree with him there. This season has been about, to me, if someone said, what has this Sixers season been about? There's two things that have emerged from this Sixers season. One, Joel Embiid has become a superstar. Before he was an all-star, now he's a superstar. And two, this season, it's like a child that you're trying to wean off sucking on his thumb. You got to stop sucking your thumb, buddy. This season was changing from Ben Simmons being the secondary scorer to now Tobias Harris. That's your role. No longer do we want Ben Simmons or need Ben Simmons to be that secondary scorer. They are trying to kind of wean that role over to Tobias Harris. I think that's what this regular season has really been about. It's about Tobias Harris now getting the message of you're the number 2 guy. You are the secondary scorer. And when I watched Tobias Harris last night, there was a shot. It was a 3-pointer early in the game. He's on the right wing. He catches the pass in rhythm. He steps right into it. Bang, nails the 3 down. I see a guy that just oozes confidence. Because maybe this is Doc Rivers. Maybe this is Brett Brown's fault in this vein. And I've said before, this is where the coaches, I think, make a big difference. Maybe Brett Brown didn't do a good enough job telling Tobias Harris what his role was. And that Doc Rivers has given him the confidence to say, you're our number 2 guy. You're not just the 4th guy. You remember when they got Tobias Harris? He's the 4th guy. They had Jimmy Butler. They had Ben Simmons. They had Joel Embiid. Maybe Doc Rivers is saying, no. You're not the 4th. You're not the 3rd. You're the guy. You're our guy. Yeah, this is Joel's team, and we're going to run stuff through Joel, but he can't do it all himself. This is you, man. You're as important as anybody on this team. 609-403-0973. Mike, to use your own verbiage, it's preposterous to compare Embiid to the legends. Well, what legends did I compare him to be honest with you? I didn't compare him to anybody. You know why? There's no one you can compare Joel Embiid to. Who else? You say Akeem Olajuwon's not 7'2", 280 pounds. He has skills like Hakeem, but nobody is 7'2", 280 pounds like Joel Embiid is. He is his own man. There's no comparison, Jason, in Claremont. I thank you for leaving your name, by the way. We might not agree on this one. I didn't compare him to anybody. I'm saying Joel Embiid is a player of his own right. He's his own guy. Mike, too much is being made about Nets defense. I remember LeBron's Cavs team struggling defensively. People said they were vulnerable. I will stop you there. I remember what you're talking about, and I had said they'll turn it on. The Cavs defense isn't as bad. The problem is the defenders that Brooklyn has, their history suggests they can't just turn it on. But you might be right. Maybe the Nets defense will turn it up a notch. Maybe they do lock in defense. Durant's a good defensive player, by the way. Kyrie stinks, and Harden could be a better defensive player when he feels like it. He just doesn't feel like it all that much. So you might be right on that. I'm not poo-pooing that comment. The Nets can turn their defense up. Here's the problem. They have no interior presence to stop Joel Embiid. So those 3 guys can play all the defense they want. Who is defending Joel Embiid on the Brooklyn Nets? I want you to name names. Ned Isakoff. Name names. That was a good reference, huh? Who is defending Joel Embiid that plays for the Brooklyn Nets? So, yeah, you might be right there. Maybe Harden, Durant, and Kyrie play their best defensive efforts. Who is defending? They don't play center. None of them do. None. So those 3 guys can play their hearts out defensively. None of them play center. And if you saw last night, that team was trying everything they could. They had everything in the kitchen sink tried to stop Joel Embiid. They couldn't do it. Boston tried too. They couldn't do it. Guess what? Everybody has tried. No one has been able to figure it out. Not this year anyway. That's the difference. Only 5 teams can win a title this season. Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, Nets, Sixers. That's my take. What's yours? 609-403-0973. Hit me up on the text. Keep them coming. 609-573-3776. 609-573-3776. I'll open the phones. Frank's going to join me to talk a little Phils. The mailbag is here. He's got a lot of questions in the mailbag this week. I saw people tweeting away at him last night, getting the Phillies questions. People are into this Phillies team. So let's talk about it with Frank Klose coming up next here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget, download the free mobile app and enter today's Sports Bash Cash code words. They're coming at 55 after the hour. Welcome back, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. I'm Mike Gill. The Sports Bash is brought to you by my guys over at Trifecta Therapeutics. You know, I've been telling you a little bit about these guys, but this is the time of the season where I see people on Facebook, Twitter, wherever, hey, recommendations for physical therapy. You're outside now. You're running around. You're playing hoops in the driveway. You're outside doing the yard work. Man, my shoulder hurts after doing the yard work. Weather gets nice, you get outside. You might have some aches and pains. The guys over at Trifecta Therapeutics, they're the guys I recommend my friends to in Glassboro. You know why? Because they work with the pros and the Joes. They've worked with the best. They work with college athletes. They can work with you. Whether you're a weekend warrior, a finely tuned athlete, check out the guys at Trifecta Therapeutics in Glassboro and find out how they can help you. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com. Phillies got their first taste of the injured list. Archie Bradley placed on. We'll get the updates from Frank right now as he joins us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as 97.3 ESPN Phillies insider Frank Klose is back for another edition of Frank's Mailbag. What's going on, Frank?
Not much, Mike. How about yourself?
All is good. Are you noticing? Let me ask you this. It's an early, the Phillies are having some success. You noticing more buzz, more engagement, more Phillies excitement?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, usually there is at the beginning of the season, but I think fans that lived through last year, this is clearly a better team, and so I think that they're really getting behind it. And the let's face it, the 4-0 start really does help.
It does, and then they kind of came back to life. They lost 2 or 3 in that controversial fashion on Sunday night. They had the game rained out yesterday. They'll have a double dip today. So let's get into what questions our listeners, viewers, and social media people have today. Tony starts things off with Frank's Mailbag. Now, if you're out there watching or listening and there's a Phillies question on your mind, text it in 609-403-0973 or put it on the stream, and we'll try to get to those as well as much as time allows. But Tony wants to know, Frank, who gets the next crack in center field? All right, everybody, this is the topic du jour. This is like it's almost like an extension of spring training. What's going to happen in center field? Well, now people have seen what is going on in center field. They're not happy. So what happens in center field?
Well, first I want to say we've seen 9 games. And so Roman Quinn hasn't given you much. Adam Hazley hasn't given you much. But you really need to see a little bit more than first. Adam Hazley was a first-round draft pick. This is really kind of when he's supposed to sort of be coming of age, right? So you got to give him the opportunities and see if he can play. Roman Quinn, of course, had many injuries over the last several years. Maybe you're starting to see some of his down months or perhaps what he is in terms of at the plate. Still a very useful player on your bench because every time he gets on base, he can steal a base and not get caught, right? I mean, he's got an incredible, I can't remember what number he's up to, but he hasn't been caught in ages trying to steal a base. So really the question for me is you got to give them, or have you seen enough of them? Can you say what Adam Hazley is at this point, right? Because then if you're going to go to one of those other guys mentioned, you still have to see what they are at this point. And Scott Kingery down at the alternate site up in Lehigh Valley there, hearing some good things so far. I think if they're going to try to go to anybody on a next permanent basis, it would be him, because you can, provided that they can give him center field and see what he can do, and then that gives Mickey Moniak some time at AAA. But I don't think they're ready to do that yet. I think they still need to see a little bit more. It's been 2 teams, 3 series. You got to let I think Adam Hazley is the one that you really need to see more of, and I would personally use Roman Quinn in that bench role and try to use his speed.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people with Hazley, I mean, is he a guy that, hey, he's just a nice player? Do you look at Hazley as more of a 4th outfielder, or do you look at him as a starting everyday player?
On this team, if he's not starting, he kind of doesn't fit, and the reason is because the Phillies have their 2 primary pinch hitters are left-handers. So if you have Adam Hazley on the bench and you have Brad Miller and Matt Moore, I mean, I did it again, Matt Joyce. I told you I'm going to mess them up all season. Matt Joyce in the outfield, he really doesn't have a spot. Then you would be better served using that spot on the roster for a right-handed pinch hitter, I think. So if Hazley's not the starter, then you need to find a way to get a right-handed bat there. And if Hasely is the starter, well, you got to play him to find out. And I think that has not really been determined yet.
Yeah. I noticed you didn't include Odubel Herrera in this conversation. Do you feel that the Phillies are also not including Odubel Herrera in their conversations?
Well, my preseason predictions is you'll never see him ever again, and I'm sticking by that. There's no point in cutting somebody from your 40-man roster for what you've seen before is essentially a mediocre player for the last several years. Even before he got into trouble, he wasn't doing much for them. So there's so much promise in even in Kingery still, I think there's a lot of promise. There's promise in Mickey Moniak. You're not going to cut somebody to have this retread sort of come back and be inconsistent some more. So I think that ship is long sailed.
All right. That's an interesting take there. And you're right. You were the one guy who held firm that you didn't think that no matter how well he played, unless he played astronomically out of his mind, which did not happen, you kept saying he was not going to make the team. Frank was right. And now you're saying you do not feel that he's a part of their future plans. All right. Paul wants to know, do you think the Phillies like what they've seen from Matt Moore, or are they already looking for more, whether it be innings or, just a more productive guy? Are they already looking to possibly for a different route with that number 4 spot?
I'll say this, I was at the game when he made his first start, and I'll tell you, he made the New York Mets look silly in the first inning. He was so dominant coming out off the, to the mound to take the ball for the first time. Then he seemed to lose some stamina. So you remember that was the game in which Brandon Kinsler kind of came in and kind of rescued the Phillies in the 4th inning, and the bullpen was able to hold it down. The other starts since then, and I kind of tweeted as it was happening, as Matt Moore faced off against Drew Smyly, the former Philly, probably pretty comparable pitchers at this point in their careers, but they were essentially, I think I called it the quintessential matchup of number 4 starters. That they're both facing good offenses, and they were both getting hit around just a little bit. I mean, they both gave up about 5 runs in 5 innings, and I think a guy like Matt Moore against some really good offenses, he might give up 5 runs in 5 innings, but I could also see him facing some teams that don't have that offense and shutting them down. I can see him having some really good starts along the way. So I think he's got a pretty decent track record. I think he's what you wanted as a back end type starter. And let's be honest, the Phillies don't have many other options beyond that anyway. So I think he's somebody that will be steady enough, and that's what you need, especially when you have a decent offense.
You just said it. He's steady enough. It's like, you're going to give up 5 against the Braves, but he's going to have that game against a Marlins young team where he keeps them off balance. He flutters up a couple curveballs, and he kind of has 6 innings, gives up 4 runs, and keeps you in the game. Or you go with the guy who can maybe give you a more dynamic start like Spencer Howard. Is that somebody that you think could replace either Moore or Anderson somewhere along the line?
At least according to what the Phillies said, they don't expect Spencer Howard to be a starter this year. They're going to try to, or at least that's what they're saying right now, right? I mean, that could change later in the season if his innings are managed, but they seem to really want to manage his innings this year, and they plan to go forward with Spencer Howard as a reliever. But Howard, by the way, he is joining the Phillies today for the doubleheader as the extra player that teams are allowed to have for a doubleheader. So maybe you'll get a quick look at Spencer Howard. But I think if he joins the Phillies again, at least in the interim, Spencer Howard will serve as that extra bullpen piece.
All right, Frank Klose, the Phillies mailbag here. Let's get Jay Mays has a question for you in the mailbag. He wants to know, what do the Phillies expect to see from Vince Velasquez that caused them to keep him around? That's a pretty interesting question. I like that one.
Well, I think the short answer is he's due $4 million. And I thought personally that there was no way that the Phillies were going to tender him a contract this offseason. I thought it was time to move on. I thought you've seen what you're going to get out of him. He's Mr. 4 2/3 innings starts, trying to strike everybody out, throwing a million pitches. And, this is one you can't actually fault on Dave Dombrowski because he inherited Vince Velasquez. In fact, Vince Velasquez was renewed on December 2nd, and December 11th was when the Phillies hired Dave Dombrowski. So I think at this point, the only choice that Dombrowski had was they could actually as a player in his last year of his arbitration years. They could have cut him and paid him $1 million to go away. I think the Phillies would. I would have liked that option too. I think I mentioned it a couple times in spring training, but he was kind of hurt, so it made it really difficult for them to do that. So, what he's going to have to be is going to be what's coming up this week, because guess what? There's a doubleheader today, and that means on Saturday you need a sixth starter. Although my at this point, I'm from what I've seen from Velasquez, which is just that 1 2/3 inning performance where he threw 8 million pitches and gave up a bunch of runs. Can you put him as your sixth starter?
No.
Right. I don't know what to do with him. And if I'm the Phillies, nobody's going to trade for him because he had his injury issues, and then now other teams see too. They don't know what they're getting. So I think it's going to have to be a situation where the Phillies find some trade partner where they've got somebody making about the same amount of money that they don't want either, and you try to do a change of scenery thing for both players. I just see Vince Velasquez does not fit on this roster, and it'd be really interesting to see if he gets the start against the St. Louis Cardinals on Saturday. Somebody's got to do it, and
look, options would be him, David Hale. Do you call Spencer Howard up and ask him to start that game? That's the problem with no minor leagues. No one's really throwing, against live hitters. You're asking a guy to come up to pitch a game where he hasn't really thrown in a live game since last year. So it's not the easiest situation, but I don't understand why the Phillies would say this is, again, the yo-yoing of Velasquez. Just tell him to focus on being something instead of being this middle guy. I think that they're partially to blame for this, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, the times that he went to the bullpen, they never really gave him a clearly defined role. It was like, all right, well, we need a starter 2 days later, so here you go start. And then he gives the usual 4-inning type start. So the Phillies had do it. The only option I can see grabbing a starter from the minor leagues. I mean, they do have Adonis Medina on the 40-man. He got to start the pinch last year. By the way, they are playing some games at the alternate site, the alternate camp of the Yankees and Mets. They did have some games scheduled there, so they will get a little bit of live game action, just because those teams are closer by. So I think they we're going to play some games there. So, but yeah, I don't know what the Phillies really can see at this point of Adonis Medina to say, all right, do we bring him up for a start? But then again, you got to start fooling around with the roster. Because it's Saturday, not today. You'd have to option somebody, and then the person you option can't come back for 10 days. It ends up being a whole big mess. And if Vince Velasquez is what he was supposed to be, he would be that sixth starter. But what kind of stinks right now is you're tying up a bullpen spot between now and Saturday if he's the starter anyway, because he's not going to pitch. So it's I don't know. This is a tough one. The Phillies really do need somebody at AAA who can come up and down with minor league option. Hopefully Medina is the guy, because you got to plug these extra starter games in a better way than they can.
Well, and Frank, too, there's rain in the forecast for Thursday. So I guess there's a possibility that game would be postponed, too, I guess, which would be a good thing for the Phillies.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the only reason Mondays got postponed was because the debacle of the day before when Marcus Stroman goes out there and throws 9 pitches, and then they pull them off the field. Right. I think they didn't want to repeat that, so they were being extra careful. But yeah, there's a real possibility there's another rain out in the future tomorrow or Thursday afternoon, in which case maybe the Phillies will get lucky and they don't need the extra starter, because probably one of those games would have to be pushed back to later in the season when the Phillies are in New York.
All right, Phil's today, double dip against the Mets. And, of course, the first game is in about an hour from now. And, of course, the second game, 7:10. I don't know how the 7 o'clock game is scheduled 3 hours after the first game, and that's an ESPN game. They better hope that first game doesn't go too long. You're gonna,
yeah, that's a great point. I didn't think about that.
Look at 7 o'clock. Just if that game's still going, pop on the last 2 innings of that game, and then roll into the. That's going to be an odd thing. So, all right, we'll keep our eyes on that. Frank Klose's Phillies mailbag every Tuesday. Frank answers your Phillies questions right here on the Sports Bash. He's at Frank Klose with a K. And he, like August, appeared via the boardwalk on the hotline. All right, Frank, I'll talk to you, pal.
Catch you later, Mike.
All right, there he goes. Frank Klose, everybody, our Phillies insider, does a great job covering the Phils, answers your Phillies mailbag questions. But when we come back, best bets of the week. Jeff Nadu is back. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that he has got on his betting mind. That's all coming up next here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app. And right now, a Sports Bash Cash code word. All right, welcome back. Sports Best Live, 97.3 ESPN. If you haven't already, you can get another Sports Best cash code word coming up at 3:55. It's worth up to $10,000. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Best. I'm having a good day today. Jeff Nadu's here. He's going to give us a little insight. I do want to talk to Jeff about a couple other things. And we'll go around the Philly sports world and get his opinion on some things. He'll give you a couple of bets that's on his mind today. What's going on, BMOC?
How are you, Mike? Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, man, it's good to see you, my brother. And, of course, there's so much going on. We haven't really kind of got into this. I want to get your take. If you were setting the gambling lines for the Eagles pick at number 12, how would you set that?
So offense, defense, you're saying?
Just in general, like there's so many,
Yeah.
like you can look at 10 different mock drafts and see 10 different guys. You got J.C. Horn, you got Patrick Surtain, you got Waddle, you've got Devonta Smith. I've seen some go with Kwity Paye. I've seen some go with an offensive lineman. Not very many of those, by the way.
No, there aren't. I think if you're just setting it, whether they go offense, defense, I think defense is probably a favorite. You know, look, there are some really intriguing players, though, as we know. I remember making a video. This was back before I want to say it was like December of 2019, back when Waddle was at Alabama, and I think he had a game where he returned 2 kicks in a game, and I made a video, and I look at it occasionally because I was way overweight than I am now. And I remember saying about how I wanted Jalen Waddle so badly. I think for me, though, I would, if you're asking me the question, I would lay the line that defense is the favorite. I would say Surtain would probably be my betting favorite. I don't think that's a bad decision either. I think the good thing about this draft, as was the case last year, there are very good receivers in the second round, and you have an easy you have a pretty early pick there. I think, what is it, 36? So
37.
Yeah, 37. So you can get a really good player in that round as well. We know how this team, though, screws things up. I was kind of disappointed that they moved back. You had the opportunity, I think, to get a really high-level player. If it were my decision, and you're not going to get Jamar Chase, that's pretty clear. I think if Michael Parsons is somehow still there, I think you got to take him. I don't think he'll be there, but for me, the ranking would be Parsons, Waddle, Surtain, Horn.
So you would say Parsons, Waddle, Surtain, Horn. So everything. Now, would you be adverse, or do you feel like you got to get a second wide receiver somewhere, or would you be adverse to taking another corner in round 2, like Asante Samuel's kid, or do you want to go to that wide receiver?
Yeah, I'm gonna. There's no way in God's green earth I would take 2 corner. You gotta get one. Yeah, you got to get one offensive player, and you got to get a defensive player. They have too many issues, Mike. Look, they have Darius Slay still. I mean, and I know they have linebacker issues. They have all sorts of issues. And that's the issue with the failure that they've been over the years in drafting, because you have not one, not two. You have 5 or 6 different needs at this point. So, I wouldn't double dip. That's not something I'm normally wanting to do. Now, if I were going to double dip on defense, I would look towards, if you're going to take a corner in round 1, maybe you look towards like a Nick Bolton out of Missouri, a guy like that, or someone along those wavelengths, maybe an edge rusher or something. But no, I would go corner in round 1, or defense in round 1, and receiver in round 2.
Yeah, Nick Bolton, I like Nick Bolton a lot. I wouldn't be, oh man, they ended up with Nick Bolton. I like him, but I have no problem. Like, to me, they're corners, man. You and I might have a shot to make this team if we try to. They got no depth at that. I mean, right now they got Avonte Maddox, Craig James. I couldn't even name the other clowns they got out there.
Yeah, and that's, again, we continue to go back to the fact that they just aren't very good at assessing talent. And that's really been the knock.
Did you not like when they took Sidney Jones?
No, I did not like that. No.
Okay. See, I had no problem with them taking Jones. This was a guy that was a first-round player that fell too.
But again, it's just, I'm not going to say it's damaged goods, but he was injured. I mean, he's coming off a bad injury. It's not like he was coming off a broken finger. It was it was a major issue in his knee. So it was just an issue. And look, weirdly enough, Sidney Jones has went to, where's he at, Tennessee and Jacksonville and played pretty well. So I don't know what it is. And it's not just this team. The team across the street on the basketball court has had the same problems for a while, where they just couldn't get kids to play, and then they ultimately leave and play better. But yeah, this is a talent-rich draft, especially at the receiver position. You look at it in the second round, you can get some really good players. A kid like Kadarius Toney out of Florida, or De'Ami Brown in North Carolina, or another guy that I think is going to have some issues just because of his own injury. Rondale Moore is incredibly dynamic. I mean, he's kind of like a Jalen Waddle type of player. He's going to be able to do multiple different things. And one of the issues, Mike, that this team has flashed for a long time, really since Brian Westbrook left, when has this team had an electrifying returner? To put them in positions where they can be, and can do many different things. They don't necessarily ever have that player. I would love to get a kid like
Darren Sproles for a while.
Well, but at the end of his career, I want this young guy that can come in and be a dynamic player on offense, but he can also go back and field kicks and try to make plays along those lines as well.
Yeah, and Deshaun, he did it like on a part-time basis. Yeah. They didn't use him all the time. Yeah, look, the one thing that's interesting to me, and I go back to this corner thing, Jonathan Gannon's going to play cover too. You need those big corners on the outside. They don't have them at all. Right. I mean, they are severely deficient. Now, bringing in Wilson, they got a linebacker who can cover, so it makes me feel like, all right. But, man, they got to get – I would say they got to come out of this draft almost 2 or 3 corners.
Well, I think – and that's why for me, as I said, I don't think that I don't think Parsons will be there. And look, you mentioned Wilson, but Surtain really kind of fits what they want to do. I mean, he's a bigger kid, very, kind of press man corner, real good size, bigger for a corner.
6'2",
yeah, he's a big kid. And, you look at him, weirdly enough, I want to say I read a comparison for him was Nnamdi Asomugha, weirdly enough. I know people don't want to hear that, but, I remember, Mike, when I was at Barstow, I wrote it was one of those days, a Sunday, where I was just disgusted with the Eagles and their issues, because I'm watching every other team that drafts a receiver, and literally every player in last year's draft that the Eagles did not take had a good season. And the one guy that had like an average injured season was the guy we got. So I went back and looked at all these different players that they did not take. And, just weirdly enough, I just continue to go back to that because that's why we are where we are. But yeah, they have to hit. And I think Surtain would make perfect sense. You make a great point with the new DC. You're going to have to get, big, thick corners in here.
Yeah. Well, and look, I am not going to sit here and argue about the fact that in the draft, since really they won the Super Bowl, from that year on, they have been dreadful in finding talent in the draft. I feel like, though, everybody feels like because they have been over this span they just are, like that they can't get it right. I feel like they can get out of this mess if they right the ship here a little bit.
But Mike, again, that's where the Howie Roseman stuff comes in. He's just inept. I mean, until you move on. Let me
ask you this question. Look, when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, Roseman was the general manager, and they would say, all right, he was the GM of that team. He built that team. Then people will say, no. It was Joe Douglas. Joe Douglas was the reason. Then I would say, well, if Joe Douglas built the team, he then also drafted the players who sucked.
Right. And look, Mike, I'll admit, I get what you're saying. I know it's not all Howie, but I think the draft is a pretty big indicator that you mentioned, can they just get better at it? I don't think they can. I mean, the ineptness has been there.
I would say this, Jeff, people, again, I'm not like I don't love Roseman. I think he's just middle of the road guy. I don't think he's the most inept like people do.
There's a lot worse.
Right, exactly. He drafted Lane Johnson, who's pretty good. He drafted Zach Ertz, who's pretty good. He drafted Fletcher Cox, who's very good.
But Mike, you have to stop saying well, he did do this. Yeah, again, occasionally a trash can gets a steak, but I mean, a clock strikes, you're always going to say, there are certain guys that, are, occasionally do this, occasionally do that. I mean, that's his job. I feel like you should hit it once in a while.
I'm just saying, I feel like we go in like the Eagles, if they're at 6, they're going to get it wrong. They traded
Right.
12. They're going to get it wrong. Well,
Yeah, I hear you.
right, if they were at 6, they're going to get it right. I think it's like you can't win no matter where you are. To me, this team has so many holes that a player at 6 isn't fixing your problems. Getting a player at 12 and then another one next year helps you bridge the gap of getting there faster.
I might be off. I might be completely wrong when I say this. I don't think they're that far away offensively. I don't. I
agree.
I think one player at 6, like Jamar Chase, could really change the fortunes of this team. And that's where I had an issue. And what it also tells me is they're just not that into Jalen Hurts. If you were that interested, why not stay there and get the best player?
I think it's evident that they're iffy on Hurts. To me, though,
but it's always how they are. They're always iffy. They never really, commit.
I will give them this, though. Do you give them for saying, you know what, this Wentz thing's not going our way? Instead of just sucking it up and keeping them, let's just start over.
Yeah, I wouldn't have had as big an issue if they didn't give him a contract a year and a half before.
Well, the fact that they were, instead of saying, we gave him this contract, we got to keep him. No, they said, you know what? We made a mistake. That's what bothers me about organizations. You draft a guy, and then you keep playing him and playing him and playing him because you have to justify that you drafted him. No, the part that makes me respect you more is to say, I screwed up. I got to get this guy out of here because he stinks. Instead, you keep playing the guy when he stinks.
Yeah, but it was all the constant back and forth where, like, one year it was Carson's our guy. We're going to invest in him. We're going up to get him, and we're then going to invest in him. Then we're going to go take Jalen Hurts, and we're going to kind of have him on his back the whole year. And, it was just, I don't know. It was just a weird situation. And I think ultimately, Carson Wentz is going to go to Indianapolis and win. I'm going to tell you that right now. This just wasn't a great place for him, and it just didn't work out. And I like him a lot. I hope he does well. I really do.
Jeff, they do. Before we roll here, I want to get a couple quick betting thoughts from you, as we do on a Tuesday. Tomorrow night, Sixers-Nets. That's really the game of the Eastern Conference season. So let's get a little insight on that. What do you think that line might be? Nets do play tonight, so they're coming off back-to-back.
I would say, it's not going to be heavy. I wod say 2.5 probably. Sixers at home. Again, that doesn't mean anything. It's going to be a great game. Obviously, these are the two best teams in the East. This is kind of a spot where, for the Sixers, there's really, Mike, no excuse, right? You got everybody healthy. You've been playing pretty well for the most part. I know Ben has been particularly good, but, there's no more, hey, well, Joel Embiid's not playing or whatever. When you ask to break these games down, it's so tough because you're getting two really good teams. It's really going to be about who can make the shot late in the game. And I always continue to say this. The issue the Sixers will have is that I don't believe they have a capable guy at the end of a game. It's not difficult to understand that without Joel Embiid not engaged, they're not as good. Brooklyn has a guy, James Harden, Mike. I know you heard of him. And he's always going to be the difference to me.
He's not playing tomorrow night.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, but I think long-term, though. Yeah. And I think, to me, regular season basketball, at least for teams like these, is it a cool barometer? Yeah. But does it matter much to me in the grand scheme of things? No, absolutely not. In fact, I was listening to, it might have been, I don't know who it was, but they were talking about how happy they were that the Sixers were playing well. And I will totally agree. They are. But, Mike, you and I know that the rubber meets the road. It's like high school. You go to high school a year. But again, the last couple of weeks are the important time. You got to get those final grades right to graduate. The Sixers need to play well in the playoffs. That's what matters to me at this point.
I totally agree. I will say this. Of all the regular season games, this one does have a little bit of meaning because I think that number one seed.
It's kind of a barometer, too.
The number one seed in the East is impactful this year.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, and that's a good point. And that's where, you also need to know, hey, if they go in and win this game by 10, you're feeling really good. And you're right, though. The number one seed is impactful, and that's a good point by you. I'll definitely be engaged in watching it.
All right. Jeff Nadu, of course, at Jeff Nadu. He is fantastic on a Tuesday here as we will. I can't wait for this draft. I'm ready for the draft. Phillies double dip. I'm into this Philly season. They got me. I'm starting off. I'm in. I was actually glad they had the day off yesterday because I was into that Sixers game last night. I love the way I mean, Embiid last night was Hakeem Olajuwon, Dirk Nowitzki. Who else was he? He was everybody in one night. That was fun.
He's really come into his own this year, and not that he hadn't always, but I made a continued case that I think he's really matured before our eyes, and I think he is a different player. He's always been the guy long term that I think if you're going to keep one, it was him. Real quick, Mike, with the double dipper tonight with the Phillies, I actually think this is a pretty decent spot in game one to back Chase Anderson. Taijuan Walker did some pretty good things in his first outing, but I saw towards kind of the end of the outing, he got a little all over the place. They can't hit for anyone, it seems like, for the Mets. I mean, whether it's DeGrom or whoever, this lineup sucks. I mean, outside of one or two guys right now, it's just not very good. Phillies lineup's obviously much better. They actually have the Mets don't really hit Anderson too well, limited appearances, but again, they're not playing particularly well to start the season. I think Brandon Nimmo is the only guy hitting over 300 on a consistent basis in this lineup. Lindor's struggling, McNeil's struggling, Conforto's been a complete mess. You got to give, I think, the edge of the Phillies at least in game one, and it's the purest of the games because we know who we're going to see.
Jeff, good stuff, man. I'm looking forward to all the Phillies draft. Good time. It's a good time.
We'll have to do a draft special, Mike, maybe before the season. Go into all these players.
I'm in. We'll
Sounds
set it
good.
up. All right,
Appreciate
Jeff.
it.
Take care, man.
All
All
right,
right,
Mike.
they do like all guests appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline, and he will be joining us on the Tuesdays. We'll have a lot to get into when we come back inside the Sixers as we go round and round. The Sixers last night with an impressive win. But how important is Wednesday's game against the Nets? We'll discuss with Kevin Kinkead from Crossing Broad next. Welcome back, Sports Bash on a Tuesday. Inside the Sixers now. Kevin Kinkead crossing broad. Going to join us now. Kevin Kinkead last night mapped out 10 different ways that Joel Embiid scored. I'm interested, of the 10, what was the most impressive way that Joel Embiid scored last night? He did it in a Hakeem Olajuwon type of way. He did it in a Dirk Nowitzki type way. He did it in like guards type way. Of the 10, Kevin, which one is, holy mackerel, this guy's 7'2", 280 pounds, and he did that?
I'll have to give you the Dirk Nowitzki back foot fadeaway baseline jumper coming from a 7-footer. It's it's just something to behold, because when you look at his body type, that's just stuff that he should not be able to do.
It's amazing when we watch him, and I watch these games with my girlfriend a lot, and I'll look at her and go, this man is 7'2" and 280 pounds. And she kind of looked back at me like, am I supposed to be impressed by this? And I'm like, yes, you
are. Yeah. No, the irony too is that he came out after the game and he said, like, what was the quote? He's like, I feel like I play more like Kevin Durant, right? And I was sitting there laughing, like, okay, 7-footer talking about playing like one of the best, small forwards to ever play the game. But it's crazy when you evaluate his 3-level scoring and look at the list of 10 baskets that I wrote down. And you're sitting there thinking like, all right, well, here's a 7-footer who's playing like a combo forward. Right. He shouldn't be hitting those kinds of shots. I mean, the dream shake, I think it was actually 2 dream shakes in one sequence, a turnaround jumper. He's fading away, hitting stuff on the baseline. He had also this play where he just flashed to the 3-point line. It was on a sideline out of bounds play, and there was only like 2 seconds left on the shot clock for a catch and shoot 3-pointer. They're talking about stuff that JJ Redick and Marco Bellinelli would be doing. So it's crazy to me how, he's not only is he doing efficiently, but he's added this third level to his game that just was never there before.
Right. Now you follow that up by saying you become numb about how good he is because you see it so often. I hope people aren't becoming numb. And again, we have this discussion a lot, and it's like it's past like the process and all that stuff. But people were so mad about what you did to get him. And all I say is you could have gone 38-42 that year, or you could get this guy. Boy, am I glad they got this guy rather than be 38-42.
That's a good way to look at it. And I think the funny thing about the let's pause and take a step back kind of conversation is that there's nothing like really profound about it. I'm not going to sit here on the radio and tell you something that you don't already know. Like, well, let's appreciate Joel Embiid. Yeah, well, no, duh. But I think because, like, to the point I was trying to make in the article is I think when you see something so frequently that maybe you don't appreciate it as much because it's right in front of your face. It's like, here, I'll give you a bad example. Like Dave Matthews Band has played in Camden for 17 straight years, right? And like, so you're used to them and you like expect a certain thing out of them, but it doesn't mean they're not great, right? So maybe like you go 1 year without it during a COVID year, and then you come back and see him again. And you're like, oh, wow, okay, I get that perspective because I took a step back and didn't have that, or I was evaluating something different, And I think sometimes you get caught up in the moment and you don't really realize, hey, we're in the midst of, a generational athlete in his prime turning in one of the best individual performances in Philadelphia sports history. I think that's why you talk to people and say like, hey, just take a step back and just try to appreciate him individually for what he's doing this year, because it's insane. He's doing things that he shouldn't be able to do.
I've seen some of those Dave Matthews at the Camden.
You would. You seem like a DMB kind of guy.
Well, I've seen a lot. I mean, I saw a lot of different concerts at the I used to be a concert goer big time, man. I've seen a lot of Radiohead. Would you think as a Radiohead guy?
Yeah, I like Radiohead. I'm more of a heavy metal rock and roll guy.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of Radiohead. I saw Soundgarden.
Okay, all right.
I'm a very 90s like alt stuff, but I like the Chris Cornell had his side project Audio Slave. I saw them.
Yeah.
Billy Corgan had a little side project called Zwan. I saw them. Don't put me into just the DMB, man.
No, I won't. Those are good pulls from you. And to continue with the example, I would say, we go a year or, year and a half or whatever without seeing any of those bands. When we go back to that first concert, it's going to hit differently. So imagine you took a break from, say for like the sake of the exercise, you didn't watch Joel Embiid all of last year. and you went into a hole somewhere, and then you came out of the hole, and you watched him play this year, and you're saying, where did this come from? Like, who is this guy? This is crazy, So that's what I'm saying. I think when you detach yourself from something and you're able to kind of isolate it and look at it in a vacuum, what he's doing individually this year is nothing less than insane.
Kevin Kinkead covers the Sixers for Crossroad. By the way, when you were at West Virginia, was the Nia Bingy Dance Hall still active?
I don't believe so. No, that was probably before my time, but there was still a lot of other things that were going on that I probably would not be able to share on the radio.
Right. Well, the Nia Bingy was this little bar. It was down like Prospect Street somewhere. It was a real small place. But on random nights, like Rusted Root would show up and just start.
There you go. No, we had a there 123 Pleasant Street was the name of this place in Morgantown. It was popular back then. Yeah. And Mastodon came through before nobody knew who they were. And then I saw him in Camden about a year ago playing in front of 15,000 people. And I'm sitting there thinking, is this the same band that I saw with like 35 people in this packed-in place in West Virginia? So it's funny how things change.
So I like this season to me has been about three things, really. Okay. One, Joel Embiid elevating himself from an all-star to a superstar, right? Two, this team has essentially, I feel, come to terms with Ben Simmons. We're not counting on you to score. We don't picture you as that guy. And three, we are grooming Tobias Harris to be the second guy. You are the second scorer on this team. Embrace it, grab it. It's not Ben Simmons. Stop asking Ben to score. Stop getting pissed off when he doesn't. The team is telling you, we don't care if Ben Simmons scores. Tobias Harris has become the second piece of the offensive puzzle.
Yeah, and I think number two is made possible by number three. Because, this with the scoring burden being alleviated by Tobias Harris and the way that he's playing, it takes that heat off of Ben and allows him to flourish doing the other things that he's doing. He doesn't need to be Robin to Embiid's Batman. Like, I don't know if there's a formidable superhero trio that I can come up with here to do the exercise. Like, if there was if there was a Fantastic Four, imagine if there was only three of them, right? But he doesn't have to do that, because Tobias Harris is playing like a max contract kind of guy. Yeah. So that has alleviated the burden, and it's kind of, taken the noise off of Simmons a little bit, but it allows him to focus on what his strengths are: defense, connecting, tempo setting, being the metronome. And that's going to be important in the playoffs, because, it's those things that Ben does that can't be quantified, when to push, when to stop, when to drive, when to kick. And I hopefully he'll raise his game a little bit as we get to that, but none of that would be possible if Tobias Harris wasn't scoring consistently, and that's helped us drive that narrative away. Yeah,
I kind of liken him. I'm not comparing him to these three, but Embiid as Jordan, Harris as Pippen, and Simmons as Rodman, the non-scoring Hall of Famer. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, Rodman's a Hall of Famer who doesn't score a lick. No, it's true, and I don't think Draymond. People do the Draymond comparison with Ben Simmons sometimes. I don't know if that one really works, because Draymond had generational scorers surrounding him. So you could have put anybody in there and say that he was going to excel. But I think that's a good shout for sure. I think it's weird because people use the term role player, and it makes you sound like you're just a bit part guy. Like Shane Battier was a role player, right? And then you use the term. I like the term glue guy a little bit better. Because glue guy makes it sound like you're not, like you're more important than a role player, but it's more of a facet of your skill sets that kind of bring everything together. Now, it's weird to think that you would have a glue guy who was the number one overall pick, who's making a lot of money, and it might be absurd to say that Ben Simmons is a glue guy, because it's kind of been a derogatory, lesser kind of term over the years. But when you think about what he does, is he kind of makes the players around him better and pulls the pieces together. So I don't think it's too absurd of a take on the surface to say that he's kind of like an incubator for everybody else around him. He's certainly a necessity, I would imagine, whether he scores or not. Kevin Kinkead, a couple quickies for him. Do you and is the team starting to trust Korkmaz? In the regular season, yes. In the playoffs, no. I just don't have any, I don't see any evidence to say that he can be a consistent guy coming off the bench in the second round of the playoffs. Now, that would necessarily wasn't the question that you asked, but I'm trying to look forward to
what is it going to be in crunch time? And when you go back to like the Raptors series of 2 years ago, it was James Ennis, Mike Scott, and a little bit of Greg Monroe coming off the bench. And for the Sixers, it's going to be George Hill, it's going to be Shake Milton, and it's going to be Dwight Howard, right? I don't think there's much room where you would even go beyond that anyway. First round, you'll probably see Korkmaz as like the 9th or 10th guy, but I don't think there's much of a role beyond that.
How important is the game tomorrow night?
It's huge. Biggest game of the season by far. I mean, because you think about it, the series is tied 1-1. You're looking at possible tiebreaker scenarios. It's got everything. Coming off a road trip, playing at home, tiebreak scenario, first place in the East. And also, it's one of the more winnable games you have coming up because then you got LA, you got Phoenix, you got Milwaukee back-to-back on the road trip. You get through this. I think there are only like 5 or 6 games left in this like hellish trip that they have, this hellish schedule. And if they get through that, like they're clean on the backside. Like there's not a lot of tough matchups coming down the stretch. So this is one of the more winnable ones they have coming up, actually.
Yeah, I mean, they had this road trip here that you were like, man, you had that 6-game road trip. You had the 2 games where you're back-to-back.
Yeah.
And now you have a 4-game road trip. The schedule makers were not nice, and they went 3-1 on this road trip. So you got to start giving them kudos there. Everybody, Kevin, wants to say, I can't take anything from the regular season. I'll only believe stuff in the playoffs. Is that the way that you look at it?
Yeah, I think so, but they're doing things differently in the regular season than they were in the regular season last year and the year before. There's just more, like Embiid is a different player. Harris is a different player. So, if you're looking towards, what was the phrase Brett Brown used all the time? You're trying to land the plane, right? So like if the landing gear is just starting to come down right now, like, no, you can take the prior games that we've already played this year and kind of put them off to the side. But now this is like the descent, so like these games count. Because you're probably going to run into Brooklyn in the playoffs. You might run into Milwaukee in the playoffs.
Getting the number 1 seed is pretty important because if you think it's a 3-team conference, you would avoid the 2 and the 3 in that second round and not have to face them until the third. Now, if you think Miami is a factor or somebody else, then maybe that gets negated a little bit. But there's a clear drop-off after 3.
Yeah, and it's huge. I mean, imagine what it would have been if you had home court against Toronto 2 years ago. If you had home court against Boston. I don't know. It's just hard to fathom otherwise. But I think especially too because this is kind of a weird season with Doc Rivers coming in, not having a lot of practice time. Is that I think the adjustments and the improvements that they make mid-season are kind of more significant than what you would normally have in a regular season because they're trying to figure it out on the fly here. And I think it's just more noticeable how they improve from game to game versus like we knew what they were in the Brett era. So I would put more stock probably in this regular season than regular seasons of years past.
Well, it should be fun tomorrow night. I don't know who Brooklyn has to defend Joel Embiid. That
nobody. Yeah,
right. Nobody. It should be fun to see what they try. Everybody's trying to throw different things, and then I would imagine once you get to the playoffs, you're going to see more different things.
Yeah, and look, no disrespect to like LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. 2 of those guys are buyout guys, and I mean you're buyout guys for a reason, right? I mean we're not talking about the Aldridge and Blake Griffin of 5 to 7 years ago, right? So Joel Embiid goes out, gets a couple of early fouls. One of those guys sits on the bench, and now what? I mean Brooklyn's doesn't have an answer for Embiid, and they might go small, which would stress the Sixers on the defensive end. But I think it's fair because everybody says who are you going to have to guard Durant, Harden, Irving. I think it's really fair to say who are you going to have to guard Embiid? Yeah. I mean, because they're a team that is not stout defensively, and the Sixers score a lot of points too. So I think it's a vice versa kind of thing there.
And Kevin, if there's one team that is equipped to say we might be able to try to at least defend you, Philadelphia has defenders who can say, all right, I can at least try. Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, George Hill is a very good defensive player.
Yes.
Green. So they might not, keep them under 20. But I think the Sixers can at least say, we could try to defend those guys. We have the personnel to at least do it. That's what makes tomorrow night a lot of fun. And then, of course, the playoffs. All right, Kevin Kinkead, Crossing Broad. Check him out. Check out his piece on the 55 different shots that Joel Embiid made last night. It was an unbelievable output. 36 points in 26 minutes. Total dominating performance. Kevin, good to see you, man.
Mike, always a pleasure. You're a great mountaineer.
You too, my friend. All right, he like all guys appeared via the boardwalk. Honda hotline. By the way, I think the Nyabingi Dance Hall and 123 Pleasant Street are actually the same place. I think they just changed names.
Well, who knew? All right, there you go.
There you go. I think Nyabingi became 123 Pleasant. So there you go.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah, so there's new stuff that you learn. And coming up, all right, 4 o'clock, football at 4. Andrew DiCecco will be here today for football at 4. We'll talk draft with him. If you have questions for today's football at 4 that you want to get in for Andrew DiCecco, text him in 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973, or hit me up in the chat if you're watching the show live. If you want a question for Andrew DiCecco for today's live football at 4, hit us up. Coming up, your phone calls, text, comments, 609-403-0973. I'll open up the phones, 609-573-3776. We'll get back into our conversation we had early in the show, which a lot of you were chiming in on. So we'll get back into that. I think only 5 teams can win a title this season. The Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, the Nets, and the Sixers. Agree or disagree? Next. All right, Sports Bash Cash in about 12 minutes from now. I have another Sports Bash Cash code word. It's worth $1,000 and up to $10,000. So listen for the Sports Bash Cash code word. Hey, if you're getting in on the Football at 4 live chat, we'll do a live Q&A with Andrew DiCecco. Send your questions in for Andrew now for the draft conversation at Football at 4 in the chat or on the draft board, on the text board, 609-403-0973. Earlier in the show, I said the NBA has only 5 teams that can win a title this season. Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, Nets, Sixers. Why? They have the 5 players that can be the best player in the league. They have the 5 MVP candidates. Yeah, I know James Harden and Jokic, they're MVP candidates, quote unquote. They're not good enough to be the best player on the team that wins a championship. The other 5, Durant, Kawhi, LeBron, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. Those are the 5 that are truly the 5 best players in the league. That's why those teams can win an NBA championship. So, Darren in Millville texts, I think it's looking really good for the Sixers, and I agree about Embiid. He's a one-of-a-kind player, and he's killing with the free throws as well. That's another great point, Darren, is the fact that Joel Embiid is not afraid to get to the line. He'll get to the line. He said, I don't get there enough. He wants to get there more. He wants to shoot 90%. I mean, it's just an unbelievable talent to have on your team. Underrated. Of all the guys, he's the most unique player of the group. 7'2", can do essentially everything. 609-573-3776. 609-573-3776. We'll go back out to the phones. Glenn and EHT, you're on 97.3. What's going on, Glenn?
Yo, Mike, how you been?
All is well.
It's good, man. You had a gentleman on earlier who had brought up sort of what my whole thing is about Ben Simmons, and that is his production in the playoffs. It'll be interesting to see if he can have 8-point games and then him beat teams in the playoffs. That's going to be a difference to me. I've pretty much pulled back on my Ben Simmons criticism. Just going to wait until the playoffs. It's all regular season stuff is important. Jockeying for position to get your seed. I'm with that. Mm-hmm. But I need to see Ben Simmons do it in the playoffs. If he can have 8-point games in the playoffs and them still win, I'll give him his credit. He's a good player. But I just think his skill set never lent for him to be the 2 guy. His skill set is what it is. He's a role player. He's a good player, very important. He's intricate in everything they do, but he wasn't lent to be the number 2. When they were talking about duos, him and Simmons, Simmons and Embiid, I'm like, no, Simmons isn't the 2. He's like 3, 4, 5 guy.
Well, in reality, though, Glenn, what you're saying, if you're just talking about scoring, is accurate. But when those 2 players are on the floor together, they are the best. They have the best efficiency of any duo in the NBA. Those 2 guys, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, this year in 2021 are the best duo in basketball.
I'm going to put a lot on Embiid and give Simmons his credit, but I'm going to see if he can have 8-point games, Mike, in crucial playoff games, and them still win. I think what you're saying there is fair. If they are able to win and he doesn't have to score, that is their blueprint. That's why, to me, they have decided we're not going to ask you, we're not going to pressure you, we're not going to make you be a scorer. They have come to terms that he is not a scorer, but he allows the other guys to be better players. That's the difference. It'll be interesting to see on the playoffs. I'll be getting back to you once they start, Mike.
I know you will, my man, and I appreciate it. I like the back and forth. It's definitely fair. I agree. If I was on the page of he has to score, if he doesn't score, they can't win, then sure. But I have come to terms with, like I think the Sixers have come to terms with. The Sixers have come to terms with the fact that, to them, Ben Simmons, let's not make him something he's not. And look, again, in this world that we live in, offense is everything. How many home runs do you hit? He only hits 198. That doesn't matter. He hit 35 home runs. That's fine. In this analytic baseball world, hitting 35 home runs is fine. hitting 300's no good if you only have 6 homers. In baseball, home runs is everything. In basketball, scoring is everything. In hockey, how many goals did you score? We don't care that Claude Giroux has a lot of assists. That's just not good enough for us. We want you to be the guy that scores. We don't want you to be the guy that lets somebody else score. Same thing with football. Offense is everything. Defense wins the championship. I don't care. I want a running back. I want a quarterback. I want a wide. What does everybody want in this draft? Wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. Name me a wide receiver who won their team a Super Bowl. None of them. There's not a team that the wide receiver was the most important piece on the team that won a Super Bowl. But everybody wants a wide receiver in the draft. Why? Because it's offense. It's flashy. It scores touchdowns. That's all that it is. It's this fantasy football, fantasy sports obsession. The wide receiver hasn't won anything. There's good wide receivers. I'm not saying that not having a good wide. Yes, having a good wide receiver helps your offense. There's no question about it. But no team is built around the wide receiver. Calvin Johnson is probably one of the greatest wide receivers that we all ever watched. He didn't win a damn thing. Julio Jones is really good. Doesn't win skedaddle. Randy Moss, no Super Bowls. Odell Beckham, how the playoffs been without you? These are great wide receivers. They don't win you stuff. They're fun. They're nice to have. It's good to call and complain about. Mike, we have no wide receivers. That's okay. You don't need wide receivers to win. You need a good defense, efficiency on offense, move the sticks, playmakers. They help. Ben Simmons isn't the fantasy sports guy, although he's great to have on your fantasy team in some aspects because he stuffs the stat sheet. He fills a lot of categories. But he does not check the box of fantasy sports star. The Sixers have come to terms with that. Many of you have not. Now, it might backfire on them. It might blow up in their face. They come playoff time, and Tobias Harris turns into a shell of himself. Look, if Tobias Harris is the player that you're getting right now, you don't need Ben Simmons to be the guy you want him to be. If Tobias Harris is playing at the level that he's playing at this season, the Sixers will be okay. However, Tobias Harris goes back to the Tobias Harris of years past. They need someone else to step up. Chris Lefferts is watching on Facebook. I love Ben Simmons. By all means, I hope he stays a Sixer forever. But what they need is someone like a Klay Thompson, a star, superstar that doesn't need the ball in his hands, but will 100% get you buckets whenever needed. They're hoping that guy's Tobias Harris. That's what they're hoping. They're hoping that guy's Tobias Harris. You might say, well, it's not. They're saying it better be because getting Klay Thompson's not easy. Getting Klay Thompson is not something that just happens. The Golden State Warriors found Klay Thompson, Steph Curry in positions in the draft that really they shouldn't have been in. Teams missed on them, guys. And the Golden State Warriors give them credit. They found 3 players that have built that team. Klay, Draymond, and Steph that were all drafted in spots that typically you don't get a talent of that magnitude. Draymond Green in the second round, Klay Thompson in the teens, and I think Steph Curry was what? 6, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that range. I mean, Steph Curry, you go back to that draft. Realistically, if you were doing a redraft, I mean, he's the greatest scorer in the history of the Warriors. He became basically the best player in the history of that franchise. But if you go back to that draft, he was the 7th pick overall. He should be number 1. He should have been the number 1 pick in that draft. You go back, Blake Griffin was the number 1 pick. If you're drafting again, you're taking Steph Curry. If you're drafted again, James Harden would be 2. Harden went 3 in that draft. How about the Memphis Grizzlies, for God's sakes? who have had more success than the Clippers have, even though they took Hashim Thabit. Blake Griffin went 1, Thabit went 2, Harden went 3. So if you were redrafting that class, it would essentially be you would go Curry, Harden, DeRozan, Drew Holiday, who went to the Sixers at 17, Blake Griffin would be 5. I guess Jeff Teague would be 6. Tyreek Evans would be 7. Ricky Rubio would be 8. And after that, you guys can have every one of them because they all stunk. Everybody else in that draft was terrible. They had 8 players in that whole draft. Taj Gibson had a cup of coffee, played a little bit, was a decent player. I guess you could throw him. Put it this way. Taj Gibson would probably be the 9th pick in that draft. If you were to do it all again, I guess you would say the 10th pick would be Wayne Ellington, Patrick Beverly. They were both in that draft. Patty Mills was in that draft. For those of you who remember, that draft was when Rubio and Johnny Flynn went back-to-back to Minnesota, and they passed on a guy named Steph Curry. There was 3 point guards taken in a row. It was actually Harden went 2, Evans went 3 as shooting guards. Rubio, Flynn went back-to-back, and then Curry. Nobody could tell you who the 8th pick in that draft was unless you were a Knicks fan. And then DeRozan went 9. 609-403-0973. Dan from EHT says the Sixers have to take advantage of this moment. Win the championship this season. Look at, unfortunately, what happened in Denver. Never know year to year. That's accurate. I think the window's there for them. I think there's 5 teams that can win a championship this year. All right, when we come back, football at 4. Andrew DiCecco. If you have a NFL draft question that you want Andrew DiCecco to answer, leave it in the chat now or text in 609-403-0973. And don't go away. Your chance at $1,000 Sports Bash cash right now. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by Prop Swap, where America buys and sells sports bets. You take your bet and take that ticket and post it on PropSwap.com and then watch the bids come in so you can sell your sports bet to other bettors and make money using PropSwap.com. It's funny. I was talking to a guy today who says, I never heard of this Prop Swap. I hear you talk about this Prop Swap, and now me and all my friends are prop swappers. I said, yeah, because you're making money. That's what the whole point of it is. It's a great, great idea. The guys at PropSwap.com who bring you the 4 o'clock hour of the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. NFL Draft, we are getting closer and closer. Mock drafts are coming out hot and heavy. They're all over the place. I love getting into them with Andrew DiCecco as when we get his thoughts on mock drafts and things that could happen, and we get questions from our listeners who are watching on the stream. If you have a draft question that you want to have me ask Andrew DiCecco, send it to me now, and we'll get that to Andrew, who is now with me here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline for another edition of Football at 4. What's going on, Andrew?
Hey, how you doing?
All is well. We got about 2 weeks left to go. So 2 weeks from this Thursday, the NFL draft will be here. I know people will say, like, don't you ever get tired of talking about the draft? I say, no, I don't. Do you ever get tired of getting into all the scenarios that could happen on draft day?
No, not really. I mean, this is probably my favorite time of the football season. The whole draft process and assessing team needs and what may or may not happen.
All right. So I love reading the mock drafts, not because I put a lot of stock in them, just because I like to see what people's thoughts are on who could fall, who gets there. Mel Kiper, who, of course, is one of the more notable names when it comes to doing these mock drafts, he put his 4.0 out today. Philadelphia Eagles, Patrick Surtain, the second, falls to number 12. Now, I want to get your thoughts on, number one, the fit, and number two, how realistic you see Patrick Surtain falling to number 12.
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I do like the fit. I mean, like I was saying before, he is of all the premier corners in this draft, he's the most pro-ready that you can kind of plug right in. He has a very refined skill set. Really active, tough physical defender, sort of the same type of background of the defensive backs that Jonathan Gannon has had success with. You look at Xavier Rose, he's somewhat of that makeup, and he's very technically savvy. And like I said, he gets his hands on a lot of football, on a lot of balls, but you want to see him kind of convert those deflections into the interceptions at the next level. But I mean, I look at the drafts, and I think that the Carolina Panthers at 8 would be an awfully nice destination for him and hard for them to pass up. Now that they have their quarterback, they may look to address the defensive side, and their secondary is extremely fluid right now. They don't have a ton there at corner. I mean, Dante Jackson's more of a nickel corner. I believe AJ Boye is going to miss the first couple weeks of the season, which is due to a suspension. And there's not a lot of viable options there. So I think that makes a ton of sense to kind of pair him with Jeremy Chin.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people are wondering, I see people in the chat saying, wow, there's no way Patrick Surtain gets by Dallas. Well, in this mock draft, Mel Kiper has a trade where Dallas gets out of that spot with New England. New England takes a quarterback, which then opens up the extra corner to fall to Philadelphia. And they actually have Dallas taking J.C. Horn at number 15. So if both Horn and Surtain are on the board, who's your guy?
Well, I mean, if you want to go for the higher ceiling, I think you're going to go for J.C. Horn, who last time we spoke, I kind of likened his skill set when asked to make a comparison to a Jalen Ramsey type of player. Now, Jalen Ramsey was far more polished coming out of college, but I do think that he has the physicality, that same mentality, the athleticism to grow into that potential role. And he has some all pros. But if you want a guy who's going to step right in right now, need very little adjusting to get to the NFL level, it's going to be a steady starter for you. I think that's going to be Patrick Surtain. So it all depends on what the Eagles are really looking for. If you want to go for that immense upside, I think you have to look at J.C. Horn.
Yeah, I know. I was a little torn on what to do there because a lot of times you figure, okay, someone's going to take Patrick Surtain in the top 10 and he's not going to be there, and fixating on Horn. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, what if they're both there? What happens in that situation? So I found that to be interesting. One of the other kind of interesting parts about this particular mock draft, which was who was after Philadelphia. So I want to ask you about, all right, Patrick Surtain at 12. What if it's between a guy like Rashawn Slater, Patrick Surtain? Are you going the offensive lineman or are you sticking with the corner?
Well, I think in that scenario, I think you go with the corner because there's many who believe that it will be a J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain. Either one of those guys could be the cornerback one of this draft class. There isn't like a bona fide top, a definitive answer in that. And Rashawn Slater's, it's Penei Sewell, and then there's a bit of a drop off there. Whereas the cornerbacks, I mean, either one of those guys is going to be, they're going to have a long, prosperous career at the NFL level and be ready to step in and contribute early in their careers, which is what the Eagles really need right now. So I think that they really need to add that building block at corner. They've struggled to adequately address that over more than the past decade, and I think they need to get that right. They're going to have an opportunity likely to take one, and I think they just gotta grab one and coach them up.
Andrew, I saw a mock draft last night, so I'll throw a name into the mix here. They had the Eagles taking Kwity Paye at number 12. Would you be more willing to take the edge rusher at 12, or would you still go corner?
Well, I mean, and this is about a month ago, I likened Kwity Paye to a top 12 to 15 player and said that if the Eagles were to trade back, I thought that he would be, an interesting option given the Michigan background, his similarities to a Brandon Graham, the versatility, and he kind of fits the mold of what the Eagles really look for in a pass rusher. Now, that said, Kwity Paye at 12 is a little bit, given the players that could potentially be on the board, I think that would be a little bit of a reach. And that it depends. The Eagles they have that propensity to kind of, they always want to strengthen the trenches. So there's always that's going to be in the back of everyone's mind. But I think that they really need to get it right and not overthink things. Take the corner, which in all likelihood is going to be the top player on the board. And I think you just got to get that and start to build their defense and with a cornerstone, no pun intended.
Yeah. Now, the reasoning behind taking Kwity Paye at number 12 was the fact that that's how they built their Super Bowl defense with the pass rusher, the edge rusher. But Andrew, the defensive coordinator is different. The defensive scheme is going to be different. This team needs corners in the worst way.
Yeah, they definitely do. And that's something that needs to be taken into account, Mike. We don't really know what this defensive philosophy is going to be. We know that Jonathan Gannon has a defensive background, which leads me to believe that they're going to put a little bit more of an emphasis on strengthening that area relatively early in his tenure. And when you're going to when we're talking about the players that could potentially be available there, I think that'd be a no-brainer to get that in there. And then, like you said, they need corners in the worst way. And based on the success that he's had with corners of that similar mold, I think you have to get that guy, and then it becomes their job to make sure that you're coaching them and teaching them properly so they can adequately adjust to the next level.
All right, we do have some questions coming in for Andrew. If you have questions that you want to throw Andrew's way, you can get us in a couple of ways. On the text board, 609-403-0973. If you want to hit us up on the text board. If you're watching the live video and you're on the stream, you could just put it in the chat, and then we will get to your questions. Wally wants to know, rumors about the Eagles wanting a quarterback. Is Kyle Trask that guy, and how high would you go to get that quarterback? Round 3, when should the Eagles start thinking about getting another quarterback, and who is one that you would target?
Well, Wally, I mean, I don't. He certainly, Kyle Trask, that is, wouldn't be in the conversation at 12.
No, I think this is like if you're getting that guy in the middle rounds.
Oh, in the middle rounds, I mean, Jamie Newman, I think, would make a lot of sense because of his athleticism and his raw ability. That I think that you get him in there and have Brian Johnson really sort of refine his skill set and really get the most out of him. I think he'd be an intriguing option to sort of push Jalen Hurts But I mean, as far as those middle round quarterbacks, well, you're not really going to find anybody that's definitively better or offers more upside than Jalen. So I think at that point, you're really looking to get a young guy who has some upside, some potential that you're not necessarily depending on, but that's going to keep Jalen Hurts on his toes. So to me, that would be in the mold of like a Jamie Newman.
Yeah, I think the second level of quarterbacks in this draft, when do you think that next group will start to go off the board? Are there second round quarterbacks, or when do you think that next group of QB starts to go?
Yeah, I think it's going to be probably mid-second round. I mean, quarterbacks, after the first round, there's obviously a definitive drop-off, but quarterbacks tend to go off the board like the Kyle Trask. Like there's that next tier that's going to start to come off the board in the second round. But, you know, I think that there's no after like Mac Jones, there's no quarterback that really like jumps out and it's like, this guy is going to be a future, you know, face of the franchise, in my opinion.
Right. Chris wants to know, could the Eagles trade back up to get a Pitts or a Chase? Would either one of them be there around 8 or 9?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. And I wouldn't rule that out, certainly, because I think that, you know, depending on how the draft board falls, I still have a really hard time thinking that Pitts gets past Atlanta at 4. I just have a funny feeling that they're going to kind of they want to add a dimension to their offense. They've always had an explosive offense with certain skill players. And as far as I think Chase, there's a chance that Chase could be there. But I mean, I think you would have to get back into that, you know, 8-7 range in order to secure that, because you're not, I mean, if Chase is there, Dallas is getting him. I mean, Dallas, they always go for those flashy weapons, and he wouldn't pass them.
Well, if it's Chase and Pitts there, is Dallas, which one are they taking, Chase or Pitts?
Well, they're decent enough at receiver. I mean, they just got CeeDee Lamb last year, so I think Kyle Pitts would make a lot of sense to them. A lot of sense for them to take him.
All right, another question. Andrew, what would you think if the Eagles took Kellen Munn in the back half of the draft? Seems like there's some upside there. Very weird-looking throwing motion. That's from Jalen.
Yeah. Well, what's up, Jalen? Kellen Mond to me is a very interesting prospect. Obviously, he wouldn't be counted on to really push Jalen. He's not going to be a threat in his first season. It's not really till his second season. But I really like I really have a lot of confidence in their quarterback coach, Brian Johnson. So they can afford to take a project quarterback like that. And I do think that he has enough skills to sort of, if they can hone his skills, I think he can be a legitimate NFL quarterback. I think that would be tremendous value adding a player like that. And those are when you talk about dart throws, I mean, that's a calculated dart throw that if you bring him into the fold, he does have some NFL upside. Then it just becomes about refining his skill set, getting the throwing motion down, and working on certain little subtleties and nuances of his game. But he certainly has a lot to like in his game.
All right, another question for Andrew. If you have another question for Andrew, we'll try to fit a couple more in. Text 609-403-0973, or if you're in the live chat, just leave it over there. Andrew, would you trade up in front of Dallas to get Patrick Surtain?
If that's their guy, if that's their top corner on their board, I would not leave it up to chance, because, you know, knowing Dallas's tendencies, they just got Trayvon Diggs last year. They need to get younger at corner. They're gonna probably be in them. They're certainly in the market for a corner. They need help all over the place. But I mean, I think just to ensure, if that's your top guy, you have to do that.
Right. So if Patrick Surtain, if you come into this draft, he's your top guy. If he's on the board at 8 or 9, you're going to have to jump over Dallas with fear that they could take him because they're not trading with you.
Oh, absolutely. If he's your guy and he's within striking distance, you have to do whatever you can to leapfrog Dallas and make sure you secure that.
All right. Chris wants to know, would you trust – I can't imagine your answer would be yes on this, but I'll ask you and let you answer it. Chris wants to know, would you trust Avonte Maddox to be the Eagles' second corner across from Slay?
Not even close. I don't.
Does he have a role? Can he play nickel?
I certainly think he can play nickel. But the thing that really stuck out to me, Mike, is the Eagles kind of poked around at the nickel corner from the 49ers. And knowing that Avonte Maddox can't play on the outside, but you have a young nickel corner already on your roster, it kind of led me to believe that maybe they have some plans to use him at safety and deploy him there. He's kind of a positionless type player, in my opinion. I think ultimately his best position is in the slot, and you have a low cost young option there. But it was kind of curious. It was kind of peculiar to me to see them look at a 30-year-old nickel corner from San Francisco. But I mean, he's not an outside corner. He was miscast last year, and they thought they could get by. I thought it was really egregious on their end to part with both Rasul and Sidney Jones before the season, and you really put all your eggs into Avonte Maddox's basket, and he did not deliver. And it was very apparent that teams, when their game plan was to throw at him and attack him early, and he just was not up to the task.
Yeah, well,
they can't go into the season with him as their number two, and nor do I think that they will.
No, and he wouldn't fit Jonathan Gannon. The cover two needs a big physical corner. He's a small guy over there. Last year, I know that you liked the signing of Nickel Roby-Coleman. Would you take a shot on bringing him back here and having him work with Jonathan Gannon?
Yeah, I mean, if the price is right, it certainly would have to match up, because you're not going to break the bank certainly for Nickel Roby-Coleman. I mean, he's a 5'8" corner that didn't really show you a whole lot last year, but he is a ball hawking, fundamentally sound corner, and there's a role for those guys in the NFL. I'd be interested to see what you can get out of him with a different coach and a different system, and see if you can really get him because at both of his stops with the Bills and the Rams, I mean, he looked like a marginally different player than what he did with the Eagles. So I think that, yeah, sure, why not? If the money lines up, bring him back in there. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work out, and you part ways at the end of the summer.
What wide receiver is going to get drafted too high?
Well, that's a good question. I'd probably Rashad Bateman or Kadarius Toney, I would say. I would go with Toney from Florida. And you get Percy Harvin vibes from him. And Percy Harvin was certainly a dynamic player in his time, but there's just too many question marks surrounding his game, and how can he be deployed? Is he going to be able to become a proficient route runner? That's always the hardest transition for young receivers, learning an NFL route tree. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can be a dynamic playmaker all you want, but I think teams sometimes get enamored with the athleticism and the speed, and they don't really look at how they can fit. And I think he's going to get overdrafted because of his sheer athleticism, and kind of like a Cordero Patterson. And then you're going to you have to figure out how you're going to use them. And I think sometimes those guys, they try to shoehorn these guys into the offense, and it doesn't quite work out.
All right, another question for Andrew. Greg Cosell today was absolutely raving about Jason Owe, his athleticism today on Inside the Birds. He says he's one of the best athletes at the position he has ever evaluated. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the pro day just solidified that. I mean, you talk about lateral movement, his hand usage, his quickness, his burst off the ball. I mean, this is a guy that's going to be a disruptive force at the next level. He's going to live on the other side of the line of scrimmage, and you need as many. I mean, the game is won in the trenches, and I think that he definitely helped his draft stock. I mean, he's certainly not going to go where many of the mock drafts had him going before his pro day, because he just completely blew the doors off that, more than some may have even anticipated. So I'm a big fan of his game. And I mean, there's not a definitive number one pass rusher in this draft. I mean, Russo's got a lot of love. Quiddy Pay's got some love. Phillips has gotten some love, but I mean, Jason Owe has really made a name for himself, and is really going to be in contention for either that first or second spot.
Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, NFL Draft, 17 days away. We have more draft coverage for you here during Football at 4. Jeff's back tomorrow. Andrew's here on Thursday. We'll take more of your questions. And Andrew, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Andrew, good stuff, man.
Yeah, appreciate the questions, guys.
All right, we'll do that again on Thursday when Andrew's back for your questions. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And don't forget, Inside the Birds, they have a new podcast coming out on Thursday at 6 o'clock in the morning is where you can get that. Andrew DiCecco will be back on Thursday as well. All right, when we come back, does the NBA have a tanking problem? Yeah, we're going to get deeper into the conversation. Jake Fischer wrote a book about that very topic. We will examine it coming up next here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app. And don't forget, this hour of the show brought to you by Prop Swap, where bettors buy and sell sports bets. Sports Bash is live on 97.3 ESPN. It's brought to you by John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. Get yours online, deere.com. Jake Fischer, author of a new book, which I am highly intrigued by. Being in the Philadelphia market, Jake, we are all very intrigued by the topic of your book. We're going to get into it. It's called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. And the author, Jake Fischer, pre-order it now. It publishes on May the 4th. He joins us to take a look at it. There it is. He's got a copy in his hand for those of you watching on the stream. What's going on, Jake?
How you doing, man? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Obviously, in this market, I wonder, when you come up with Built to Lose, what's the team that stands out that kind of started this tanking era? Is there one?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's Sam Hinkie's process Sixers. I'm from Philadelphia originally, from Cherry Hill. I went to more games I can count as a kid. I'm wearing an Eagles hat right now. I'm not a Sixers fan anymore, like covering the league full time for almost a decade now. That kind of bleeds out of you. But I came up writing for Liberty Ballers at SB Nation, covering that team in the throes of it. I think I joined a little after Hinkie got hired, that May 2013. And I also went to school in Boston. I was covering the Celtics, who people forget at the same time, same night, Hinkie traded Drew Holiday to New Orleans in order to get back Nerlens Noel and that 2014 first-round pick. The Celtics also traded KG and Paul Pierce to start their rebuild, and they tanked a year to get high up in that 2014 draft class. And it really happened all around the league. Phoenix, Orlando, Sacramento, Cleveland, Minnesota. We saw a lot of other analytical executives, just like Sam Hinkie, rise to power and kind of try to copy the Oklahoma City Thunder model and kind of outlast the Heat's Big Three era and be that next version of the Thunder once maybe LeBron kind of slipped into his prime a little, or slipped out of his prime a little bit.
So, the Sixers make that move, and they went on like a 3-year journey almost of tanking.
They did.
Would you say they did it better than others? They was it their intention to do what they did? Like, when you look at what they did others follow suit of what they were doing? Did they do their own little thing? Like, how would you kind of describe what Sam Hinkie and the Sixers kind of started, or what they did?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really think, and I've been explaining the book as kind of like an anecdotal history and kind of a comparing and contrasting of how all these different teams did it, being that there is no one way to build a franchise correctly. There's too much luck involved. We just saw, unfortunately, what happened with Jamal Murray last night, tearing his ACL, right? Like, the Nuggets have done pretty much every move perfectly, right down to this latest big swing with Aaron Gordon. Sure enough, Jamal Murray tears his knee apart, and who knows what the future in Denver now holds. It's the same thing with all these teams. A lot of them just didn't get all the way to where Denver, where Philly are now. I think what Sam did and what Philly did differently from Boston, from Orlando, definitely from Phoenix, that Suns team in 2013-14 was actually supposed to be worse than Hinkie's Sixers before they became a playoff contender. What the Sixers did was tank year after year after year, like you mentioned. They originally were going to try and bounce back quicker than anticipated, but I think the plan with people it gets misconstrued. Hinkie wasn't always just going to draft injured players. The plan, like we talked about, it gets changed. There's luck involved. It just so happened that Joel Embiid fell to them at 3 the year after they took Nerlens Noel. And we all can look back right now. Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker went 1 and 2, other guys on top of that class. The reason the Sixers are even being asked by you, Mike, as the best case scenario of this tanking era is because they got Joel Embiid. So I think the one thing that they definitely did differently was the longitude of it. But at the same time, if they don't get Joel, if the Cavs take him, whatever, there's so many different pivot points on any team's rebuilding process.
Jake Fischer, the book's called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. And when you talk to executives, I saw this, by the way, I want to bring up the cover of the book. The ping pong balls have the different pictures. And I said, there is one of the Sixers, but it's way back there.
Right there in the it's in the corner.
Right?
It's right here in the corner. Yeah, there's another one too.
Yeah, the Sixers.
The cover, not to interrupt, the cover is based off of the lottery from 2014 that we were just talking about with Joel. And this is the order. The Cavs went 1, the Bucks went 2, the Phillies 3. That number 10 is the pick we just talked about that they got back from New Orleans, which they sent Dr. J to the podium that year for him to be the representative. And when 10 comes up on the clock, I don't know if you remember, the ESPN broadcast zoomed in on Dr. J's face. He had his brow scrunched. He was so confused, and he didn't know. He went to New York only knowing they had a top 3 pick. So he called it what the bleep moment to me because he literally had no idea. He went on national TV and had no clue the Sixers were going to get that second pick that year.
That's right. That's a good point. So good context there as to the order of these ping pong balls. So you spoke to a bunch of executives and kind of got a account of the modern team building.
Yes.
Is the NBA, I don't want to say universal, but are more executives and teams willing to go this route now because of the way the Sixers came out the other side of this? They didn't win a championship, but I think it'd be argued that they are more relevant now than any time in their history, maybe other than 83 winning a championship and going back into the early days. But people care more about the Sixers now than ever before. So are teams more willing to bite the bullet, lose a couple years because of what the Sixers and others have done?
So again, the big difference in what Philly did from other teams, right, was the years-long effort, that brazen effort to say we're going to punt multiple seasons. I don't know if that's going to continue, where teams will be porous intentionally for the better part of a couple of years to stack guys together. But we are seeing it right now. I mean, this year's draft is considered to be the richest draft class since that 2014 class we were just talking about, with Cade Cunningham and Jalen Suggs. We all saw in the NCAA tournament, Evan Mobley, other guys down in the G League Ignite team. And we've seen the Houston Rockets, they move on from James Harden, and they're going to be bad for a little while now here, trying to recoup some talent through the draft. The Oklahoma City Thunder did the same with Russell Westbrook and then Paul George. And they have, 17 first-round picks in the next 7 years or something crazy like that. The Orlando Magic just pieced off Nikola Vucevic, Aaron Gordon, Evan Fournier at the trade deadline. A lot of teams are playing the draft right now. This is definitely a pretty open attempt to try to, position yourself in the lottery, get a high pick. The difference is with the way that, they reformed the lottery structure based off of what Hinkie Sixers did. Now the bottom 3 teams only have a 14% chance rather than the worst team having a 25% chance. Time will still tell if teams are willing to do this now for, 3+ seasons. But the benefits, no matter what, as the lottery reform stands, as we're seeing with Houston and OKC and Orlando and even Detroit, like tanking for at least a year, that is definitely in vogue still.
Right. And I guess from you talking to these executives and people in the league, do they understand now that their fans are also willing to embrace it? Because part of the problem, Jake, would be we were growing up as kids in the 90s and 80s. These are businesses. We can't lose. We got to get people to come here. But the ownership groups are now almost saying our fans are on board with this, so go and give you the green light to do it.
Yeah, you talk to any executive in the league right now, and they're very well aware of NBA Twitter and the conversations and how – not just the offseason speculation of which player is gonna be a go team with this guy. Fans are talking about executives now just as much as they are about players. They're talking about guys' draft records and transaction logs, and they know they feel the pressure to win the deal, get instantly graded as the guy who got one over on the guy running the other front office. And that is a complete reflection on these decisions at large of how to build a team forward too. And you're right, ownership at the end of the day does play the biggest factor. Like the Rockets, they didn't want to try to move off of Harden earlier. They also could have gotten better deals for PJ Tucker or Victor Oladipo or other pieces. But they had, I've talked to executives with that team, with other teams who have talked about how that ownership group with Tim and Fertitta, really has a huge stronghold on a lot of those decision making. So it's a real factor for sure.
Jake, what does the league think about this? Bill, how the NBA's tanking era changed the league forever. What does the NBA think about losing being the best remedy to try to win?
It's a problem. I mean, we're seeing it right now with those teams I just talked about. I mean, it's a combination of the COVID season, all these back-to-backs, but we're seeing 40-point, 50-point losses on the regular here. And that's when a lot of teams, they're resting guys like Al Horford with the Thunder just kind of agreed to not play with them anymore this season, which, we were having this whole controversy a couple of years ago about the Spurs resting stars on national TV nights. And the Pelicans were getting fined for benching Anthony Davis when he wanted out of New Orleans. And they didn't want him to get hurt for trade value. There's definitely executives and people in the league office that I've talked to who are kind of throwing up their hands and saying, this is definitely we want to be encouraging this. No, this is a problem. So I don't know where we go from here. I really think the only opportunity to change this truly is, Mike Zarin with the Boston Celtics said this to me, and he repeats it all the time. The only way to truly eliminate tanking is to get rid of the draft order being dependent on the inverse of the standings. If it was some type of arbitrary system like the wheel that Mike Zarin proposed, where you're in a bracket of 5 teams every year, and there's a little lottery in those realms, that's something that I think could be interesting. This play-in tournament is getting brought up right now by Luka Doncic because the Mavs are a little bit complainy that they're going to have to play in it. I think it's a great idea. There's been talk in years past about putting all the teams that don't make the playoffs into their own tournament to have them compete for the number 1 pick. I think that'd be interesting, but then you would see teams probably tank out of the playoffs to get into that tournament. So it's just kind of like figuring out what the ripple effects would be.
Right. And I've always said on my show, in my fantasy football league, we did this because teams stopped turning their lineups in. So what we did was, if you finished the first place out of the money, you got the first selection of where you wanted to pick the next year. So it encouraged teams that keep winning and keep hey, we don't want to sit out Al Horford. We want to keep winning. We might finish 8th. Well, that gets us the 3rd best opportunity. I don't think that would ever be the case, but they got to figure something out because they are rewarding. Like you mentioned, the play-in tournament. Well, teams might lose. You're not tanking the whole damn season, though. You might lose a game or 2 to say, we don't really want to be the 8th seed, but you're not making a mockery of the whole.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a much better, pill to swallow. And I think there'd be ways to be creative about it, right? Like you could make it a double elimination type situation where, you have to win your first game and then you move along and then you could get some double. I mean, there's so many different facets they could make it happen. I think it'd be great. It would probably be a money revenue thing. I mean, imagine if during the shows in the Philadelphia market, imagine if obviously the process era galvanized a huge portion of that fan base, right? The Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast guys have this lottery party every year. They get thousands of people going to Xfinity Live. Imagine if the Nerlens Noel, KJ McDaniels, Jeremy Grant process Sixers got into a postseason tournament to win that number 1 pick at the Wells Fargo Center. That place would have been going nuts. I think any owner, any league official would be pretty happy with the gate prices that could get off something like that.
That's true. Jake Fischer, the book is called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. You can pre-order it now. It comes out on May the 4th. It's perfect for that first weekend at the beach down here at the Jersey Shore. Just
definitely. I'll be in Ventnor.
All right. That's where I'm from. All right. So, Jake, give me a story, an example of something that you mentioned in the description of the book. It talks about feuding between agents and executives and these. Like, give me something that you were like, wow, this thing has really taken over the league.
Yeah. Well, I'll bring it to Philly because obviously this is the market we're talking about right now. And, when Sam came in and took over that organization, it was definitely still towards the beginning of analytics sweeping the industry, like you talked about. And there was kind of like a line in the sand, whether you were a basketball guy or an analytics guy. And, the Sixers had this analytics guy in the early era named Aaron Barzilay, who was around. And when the Sixers ownership group, this Josh Harris, David Blitzer group, bought the team, they were curious about analytics already. I mean, it makes sense they ultimately hired Sam. And they had Barzilay, they had him run like a statistical analysis over the past decade. I mean, the Sixers were actually, ironically, pretty good drafters, right? Before this, they picked Andre Iguodala in 9th. They got Thad Young late. They got Drew Holiday in the teams. Vucevic, didn't play there long, but they got him in the teams. And look what he's become. Lou Williams in the second round, Kyle Korver, Willie Green, whatever. They had a pretty long draft history. So sure enough, this statistical data spits back out that the Sixers have had the best draft ratio for like success from draft slots, like the highest win shares per pick. Probably guys like Lou Williams help, And so the Sixers will always draft during that process. They would get all their scouts together. They make their big board 1 through 60, 1 through 100, whatever. They would tweak it a couple times, and then as the draft just came up, they would just take the guy at the top of their board. So it worked through and through and through. And when Sam got hired, there were still a lot of those people still around. So when he starts to come into play in May, only a month before the draft, he is starting to engage in those conversations with people, but he's not ever telling them his opinion. He's only asking questions. And the old guys are starting to look around like, why is he not telling us what he thinks? And, he's going into his office door with his guy, Sachin Gupta, who he brings in from Houston, and they're kind of working all night, and everyone else is kind of hanging around, like wondering whether or not they can leave or not. And he comes out his door sometimes and says, "Oh, why didn't you guys go home?" And they're like, "Well, you didn't tell us to leave." So when the draft comes around that Wednesday, he called in Courtney Whitty, their longtime director of player personnel, and Rod Thorne, the former president, handed them 2 binders and said, this was like the Wednesday afternoon before the draft or that Thursday before the draft, that afternoon, and said, "We're trading Drew Holiday if Nerlens Noel is still available at number 6. Don't tell anybody." And throughout that night, they would sit in that private room of Hinkie's office. It was separated by a door like a adjoining hotel room. And they would have someone come in and call somebody to like see the Don in the back room throughout the draft night and say, "Hey, you were really evaluating, this player. What do you tell us about him?" And they would send them back out there. And, we know that famous picture of Joe Dumars on 2 cell phones. I was told that Hinkie was talking into a landline and a mobile phone. And, in that night, he was this big negotiating guy. He ran all these deals. And the best story to cap all this up is someone told me to give an insight to this negotiating style he did. Because, he made like 5 trades in that second round. Back in college, Sam Hinkie in Oklahoma as an undergrad studying business, he had to fulfill a negotiation requirement. So he called and ordered 50 pizzas. This is what the legend says. This giant filled lecture hall, 100 people, whatever. This little guy, pizza delivery guy, comes in with all the pizzas, and Sam Hinkie successfully negotiated to get all those pizzas for free in front of that entire room. So that is where I leave you.
All right. Great stuff. Jake Fischer, the author of the book, is called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League, and really the Sixers forever. It's the team now that many people were apathetic about for their whole, and now they care about losing on Tuesday night in February on the road in Cleveland because it wrecks their whole week. It's like an Eagles loss, almost. That is what Sam Hinkie really created for the Sixers. Good or bad, I don't know. The Twitter world would say that it's very toxic, but for what I do, and it created a book for you, Jake. I appreciate you coming on, and it's good to see you, man.
You too, man. Thanks for having me.
Ventnor Beach, man. We'll see you down there.
For sure. Have a good one.
Jake Fischer. The book is called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. You can get your copy now on pre-order. It publishes May the 4th. I appreciate him jumping on board right there. How about that? We've talked a lot about tanking over the years, but how accepted it has become. It's something we talked a lot about is fans now accept it, and that is the big difference. The fans have accepted it. Not the get off my lawners, but the younger fans. They have now embraced this concept of losing to win. There's a lot of examples around the league where it's happened and it's worked, and now ownership groups are signing off on it. Go ahead. Waste this season, quote unquote, because I need better players than what I'm getting with pick number 11. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. I got a Sports Bash cash code word coming up in 9 minutes. Thanks to Jake Fischer. Good conversation with him. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. I've got the Sports Bash cash code word coming up. It's worth $1,000, and I have that coming up for you at 4:55. So stick around. That's coming up pretty soon. If you have the free mobile app, you can enter the word there or on our website, 973ESPN.com. This just in, Roman Quinn's not good. In fact, he stinks. Phillies have an issue in center field. We talked about it earlier with Frank. But who's the guy that fills that role? Who actually is in the system? They have about 9 center fielders, it feels like, in this system. They have got to find someone better than the 2 guys they have out there right now. I understand if they don't want to bring up Odubel Herrera for the PR headache that he might cause. Fine. But how much longer can they roll out Roman Quinn and Adam Hazley? You know, Quinn is batting 9th. He's hitting .059 right now. He struck out again today. And I like Quinn. I have no problem with Quinn on the roster. He has a role on this team. He can play part-time or 30% of the time or 25% of the time or whatever it is. He can run, defensive replacement. He has a role. But you can't keep rolling a guy hitting .059 in the lineup here. Phillies owe it to themselves. You're on the clock now, Phillies. They're down 2-1 today, by the way. Early home run. Smith hit a home run for the Braves. And I think Alec Boehm hit a home run for the Phillies. Or he doubled. That's what I saw. He doubled and scored a run on a Knapp RBI. So Knapp drove home Boehm. Boehm doubled. Knapp drove him home. And by the way, this time Boehm's foot did touch the plate. 2-1 the score. But that lineup, you're rolling 7 guys out there for the most part. Real Muto's not in the lineup for the early game today. Knapp's catching. So the Phillies need to figure out and address this. And I don't know if it's Kingery that you give him the shot. Is it Moniak? What I would do, if I'm the Phillies right now, what I would do, if I'm Dave Dombrowski, Quinn stays, Hazley goes, Kingery comes up, Torres goes, and Moniak come up. Moniak and Kingery platoon in center field as the right-handed, left-handed platoon. They got to find a right-handed bat off the bench. That's why Hazley's got to go. Torres would go because you need 2 spots. The problem with Quinn is I think he's valuable with the speed. They need a right-handed bat off the bench. Right now they have Joyce and Miller, excuse me. So they got to figure out something in that situation. They got to find a right-handed bat off the bench. That's one thing that they're lacking. But I go with Kingery, and this is what I could do. Kingery can give guys a breather. Boehm, Gregorius, Segura. You could play him in multiple positions. He could play center field with. I play him against left-handed pitching, and I play Moniak against right-handed pitching. I got to go down that road because what I got going on right now is an embarrassment to a major league lineup to have that guy hitting .059 in the 8-hole every day. It's not like they don't have answers. They do have answers. I can understand if you're like, what do you want us to do? We got nothing. They have answers. You owe it to the rest of this team. I know it's 9 games in. I get it. You know what Roman Quinn is. He's a part-time player, and that's okay. It's okay for him to be a part-time player. Look, anybody could see it. I'm no scout. I probably could be a scout. If the Phillies want to hire me, I'm willing to scout. I could give you the information. Quinn can't play. He's a 25% player. Use him to run. Use him to play defense, even though he's not a great defensive player and his arm is just iffy. All right, when we come back, Pete Thompson coming up. All right, final hour of the show here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. I'm your host, Mike Gill. We do it every Tuesday. It's a Tuesday with Thompson. The PT is here. There he is.
Tuesdays will never be the same.
Phillies shirt back on. I feel like you had that on the Friday, Happy Hour Friday. I feel like you were wearing that same shirt.
No, I was wearing a Phillies shirt, but this is the shirt that I gave to you that you gave back to me.
Yeah, you were wearing that the last time because you said, I'm wearing the shirt that I gave to you that you gave back to me.
No, because you gave me two Phillies shirts back. I gave you one that was a black one that has the Phillies P, and then I have this red one.
Yeah, but it wasn't a black one. It was a red one.
Well, I have multiple thanks to you, and you gave me one that I didn't have. I'm going to wear that tomorrow. Well, unless they lose. If they get swept in both games, then I'm not wearing it. But,
fine.
Yeah. I can't wear a Flyer shirt. I mean, they did win on Saturday when I went, which was unbelievable. Remember
go back on Sunday.
Remember my conundrum that I had? Go back on Sunday and skip the Masters. Are you kidding me? The greatest moment at that hockey game on Saturday when I was there was
Masters stunk.
No, it didn't. Not for a true golf fan. It was still exciting. It was
the lowest rated, other than last November, lowest rated in, I can't remember how long. I forgot what I saw today.
Well, no Tiger. Phil wasn't really in it. Jordan Spieth didn't have a run. The guy, Rory McIlroy, all the names that would be popular. But, I was going to say the greatest moment of that hockey game was when somebody turned around, like somebody in front of me was wearing actually a Galloway National shirt. And said to his buddy, like, what time's the tea time tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And I said, are you at Galloway National? The guy said, yeah, I'm a member there. I'm thinking like, hey, can I talk to you? But he says, yeah, the Masters is in a delay. I was so into the hockey game, I hadn't even paid attention to the Masters. And the fact that it was in a delay on Saturday was like, sweet, I'm not missing a thing. So I was really excited about that. Yeah, I guess it wasn't as exciting, all things considered, but it got exciting for like a brief second. Xander Schauffele had a chance, and that was a guy that you thought, or was it Colin Moore? No, it was Xander Schauffele, right? I'm mixing up my names, but there was a chance, and then he dumped the ball in the water on 16, and then it was all over. Like that was all she wrote.
I got to tell you, I didn't watch one shot in all 4 days.
Oh, see, I went the opposite way. I went wire to wire. Very much so. Went wire to wire. And on Thursday, then on Friday, I was sort of one of those almost like the way I was watching Flyers games this year. It was on, but I was like texting and tweeting and doing things, right? But it was casual. Then Saturday, of course, I went to the hockey game. But Sunday, I watched it. Listen, that Xander Schauffele putt, Gill, it cost him like $575,000. Like instead of finishing in sole second and getting 1 point something million, he ended up in a tie for third with Jordan Spieth. And I mean, can you imagine one putt costing you almost $600,000?
No, I couldn't because I'm not a very good. Although every once in a while, I will make. You can attest to this.
I can. I've watched you golf.
I will make that putt from 28 yards away, and it's just like what the, and then that's it. That's my shot of the day. I'll hit a couple drives that are usable, and then I'll hit one really deep putt in the course of the day. But that's right. Look, I'm a Masters fan. I was already, but then stuff happened, and then Rose was 6 strokes up on Thursday, entering Friday to start the day, and I was like, so I kind of was out there. And then Saturday kind of came around, and I started to do some things, and Sunday, I was just kind of doing other stuff. But so I wasn't all that in. But I want to get into your head about what happened with the Flyers yesterday, which was essentially nothing. How do you read what they did yesterday? Because I got a lot of thoughts on it. I opened the show yesterday with I talked a lot of Flyers yesterday. I got a lot of thoughts on this, but you're a Flyers guy through and through, way more than I am.
I am. So, how do I read it? I read it as like the best that Chuck Fletcher could do with the crappy hand that he had. He's trying to salvage what he can. You certainly aren't going to be buyers when your team goes out and blows that game against the Sabres. I mean, they haven't. It's like where we talk about the locker room proof that they are worthy of getting players back, and so they weren't going to go out and be buyers. And I saw for the national people, there are national people out there calling the Flyers losers for what they did at the trade deadline. I think they did the best they could at the trade deadline, which is they actually got something for the bag of pucks that is known as Gustafson. I mean, that was a mistake. So you get a draft pick back, you get something. Fine. Lawton was a guy that everybody thought they were going to move because, there was a chance that they'd move him. He'd be a rental player and then they'd bring him back. Well, instead of that, they went out and found a number that fit for both people. And Scott Lawton never has to leave, so I'm okay with it. I think Scott Lawton's stock is on the rise, so I was all right with that. And then Michael Raffel, quite frankly, and it surprised me, Michael Raffel has played more games in a Flyers uniform than guys like Dave Poulin, than guys like Eric Lindros. Michael frickin' Raffel, that's the guy that has like a historic name, right? But he's a glue guy, and Raffel to me is a guy that they basically moved on from because of his contract. So they're going to give the young guys a chance to see what they can do.
Yeah, look, I don't have a problem with the Lawton stuff. I mean, these are all minor stuff. And to me, I get it. They're not trading Voracek. Not happening.
Well, they can. I mean, they probably would, but they can't. Like, nobody's going to pick up that contract. They might leave him exposed to Seattle. They might do that.
I acknowledge that nobody wants him is my point.
Okay.
But my question, and I know we've talked a lot about Giroux, but has anyone ever approached Giroux? Like, hey, is it time? Do you want us to try to trade you? Do you want us to make calls? I feel like his name never comes up. No one ever talks about it. It's almost like it's off the table. And I said the other day, like, he's been here 14 years. Like, this is Andy Reid. Like, hey, you're a great player. Do you want us to try to move you? Is it time to move on? Like, it never comes up at the deadline that, hey, maybe they should just ask him. Like, if you said, hey, Claude, would you like us to make calls? Do you want to stay here, or would you be willing to? Like, there was a trade. Hall got traded. He had a no-trade clause, and he said, yeah, if I didn't have the no-trade clause, I would have ended up in Siberia. Instead, I got to pick where I wanted to go. Like, hey, Giroux, are there 3 or 4 teams that you're interested in? Like, I don't understand how that's never even come up.
Right. And it hasn't come up because I think he's pretty much made it clear that he does not want to go anywhere. Claude Giroux still feels he's that doctor that's like, how long has the patient been down? Really? Well, I still think I can bring him back. Claude Giroux still feels like he can win a Stanley Cup with this Flyers team. Believe it or not, he feels that way. Plus, if you saw like some of the behind the scenes footage on Claude Giroux and stuff, he's got like what did somebody tell me the one time about his car when he parks his car in Center City? He's got like a lift where the car like goes down or disappears, like so he can have more space to get to. It's some fancy like $500,000 thing. He's driving a Bentley or whatever the heck he's driving. I mean, he's making buku bucks in the one city that he's played his entire career. He loves it here. He's still producing. I'm not on the Claude Giroux hating list. I do not think that Claude Giroux is the problem with this hockey team. I do think that Claude Giroux isn't Crosby, isn't Malkin, isn't a lot of people. I think he's a good but not great player at many times. But
he's a very good player.
He's a very good player.
I liken it to, look, even fans got to the point where they were ready to trade Allen Iverson. He's not Allen Iverson. I can tell you that much. So, like, I just feel like it's never even brought up. Like, it's crazy to me. Like, that isn't even a scenario come draft time. You don't see anybody write about it. You don't hear anybody ever ask the GM. You don't hear anybody even ask him, hey, Claude, you have a no-trade clause. Would you ever consider waiving that? Is it time? You've been here. It's been a great run. You've been a great player. Do you think it's
now? Wait a minute. Are you asking why a member of the media hasn't asked that question? Did you see prior to the season when my man Sam Carchidi asked him, like, "Hey, you're about to turn," and what is he, 30, whatever his age is?
He's not as old as you might think he is, by the way. People,
right? But his birthday was right when the season started. You're about to turn 33, right? Because the season started in January. So he was 32 when Sam was asking the question. You're about to turn 33. And Sam goes and basically asked the question, like, all this time you've been in Philadelphia, and this was what Claude Giroux gave him back. Death stare. He was pissed that Carchidi even had the chutzpah to ask that question. And that I thought that was a fair question out of Sam Carchidi. But Sam often is put in that place. I think Claude Giroux is stubborn, Mike Gill. I think that he still feels that he can win a Stanley Cup with this team, and whatever he's enjoying, I wish you would pass it to you and I, because we'd be a lot more happy-go-lucky all the time. I mean, I just don't. Yeah, you're right. Have they ever had that conversation with him? Did Hextall, did Paul Holmgren, or now Chuck Fletcher, have any of those guys ever said to him, would you be willing to waive your no trade clause? No, they haven't had that conversation with him, because Claude makes it clear that he doesn't want to go anywhere. He's very happy with the money he's making. And if they're not going to have that conversation with him, it's not the way they would have, obviously, the conversation with his agent, and his agent has also made it clear through Claude, no, this guy isn't going anywhere. I mean, look, remember when Brian Propp retired or left the Flyers at the end of his career and went to like Boston and the Minnesota, and he almost won a cup with Bobby Clark. Dave Poulin left the Flyers and went to Boston, but it was a different time back then. Those Flyers of the 80s, they didn't have such a thing as a no trade clause. You know, even a guy like Ray Bourque, who left Boston to go to the Avalanche and win a cup, right? There wasn't a no trade clause that just, all right, let's try to make this work.
Here's something I want you to chew on. Again, as a Flyers guy, Kevin Durso yesterday said something that I feel is sad and eye-opening. Who runs the Flyers? We knew it was Mr. Snyder. It was Ed Snyder. And he said, it's a great question. They have a guy named Dave Scott. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup. But he said, it's basically a business in Comcast who runs the team. Yep. And they are running it as such, meaning they don't care if the team wins. They want it to turn a profit.
Yep.
And that's a sad comment that if I'm Claude Giroux, don't I notice that? Don't I see that things have changed? Or anybody, you know, they made the trade last year. I can't remember who the guy was, but they traded for him, and then he went right back to Anaheim. I said, who chooses to go to Anaheim when you're playing for the Flyers? Like, this was a place that if you landed in Philadelphia, it was like, woohoo, I'm at a place that appreciates and loves hockey. No, I want to go back to Anaheim. So I feel like this organization is really lost the identity of who they were.
I would agree with that. And listen, I was in the building there. Make no bones about it. Whatever the attendance is for the Flyers right now, it's not a sellout. Okay. I mean, they're doing everything they can to get people to come into that building and sample that product.
They have 3,500 tickets. They can't sell them out.
That's correct. Right now, they cannot sell 3,500 tickets, which is unbelievable to me.
I mean, make the argument that some people don't feel comfortable going to a game indoors yet, but still.
Right. I mean, but the product is bad, Mike Gill. When the product is bad on the ice, you're not going to put asses in the seats, right? You're not going to put butts in the seats. And at the end of the day, what you're talking about and what Durso accurately pointed out, okay, the Flyers of the 80s, even the 90s, the 97 Cup team, even the 2000 team, once Mr. Snyder passed away, sadly, the Flyers have become, and I'm going to use this word, corporate. They are corporate. They are no longer that franchise that treats everyone like family. And it's impersonal. It's not the same. And I'm not throwing that on Dave Scott or anybody. It's just the reality of what it is now. It is run as a business and not as like the Flyers. Look, and there's still old schoolers, right? But you notice too, by the way, you know, a lot of the old schoolers no longer are around because it has gone corporate, right? Bill Clement was a member of the Flyers broadcast team for many years and is no longer around a part of that, right? Bob the Hound Kelly, right, was the ambassador.
NBC.
Now, Clement is NBC, but Bob the Hound Kelly, for example, who would walk around and be the ambassador, that's the Flyers. That's the Flyers organization. So, I mean, it's really kind of all in conjunction, too, because it's all corporate.
Yeah, I think they had an opportunity yesterday to at least, approach or whatever. Look, they need to change everything up. They need to shake it up. They can't continue to come back with this same group, this Giroux, Voracek, Couturier. That group is just, we know what they are. That you're going to have very frustrating seasons. I think that's the moral of the story.
And to your point, by the way, like take the Scotty Lawton example, right? Like if they were going to really do something sort of outside the box or shake something up, then make a move for Scott Lawton, like trade him to somebody, try to get something back, and maybe that piece that you get back, and then you can still re-sign Scott Lawton.
Yeah.
But Chuck Fletcher wouldn't.
You bring back Scott Lawton, it just feels like, we're just going to stick with the same this Lawton, Konechny, Couturier. I mean, it's been the same. Like, I feel like Lawton's been here for 10 years as part of this whole thing.
Yeah, now, of course, remember, when they came out of the lockout in 04-05, right, that's when the salary cap started. For the next 10 years, the Flyers acted like the salary cap didn't exist. It was like they didn't have an abacus, they didn't have a calculator, and they had we're just going to spend what we can spend. I mean, look at these overreaching contracts that they've had. Brizgalov, Vinny Lecavalier, Andrew McDonald, right? They were always chasing like big pieces to try and bring that in. And then when the bill came due, which is basically the last 5 or 6 years, and so they bring in Hextall. All right, this is a guy that isn't going to go chasing these guys. This is a guy that's going to go low and slow and take his time. Of course, they also didn't know this is a guy that's going to count the number of buffalo wings on your damn plate and start bitching about that. So, yeah, I mean, they've made a lot of missteps and they've become corporate, sadly. And they're a mess, man. And
you say they become corporate, sadly. Can you feel that when you went to a game on Saturday, that it's just different in that place?
I could feel that. I also could tell you that, I think the Wells Fargo staff, which is separate, they're not Flyer staff, they're building staff, but I think they have a thankless job. Their job in the seats was to tell you to keep your mask on, right? So like my buddy and I go there, and the first thing he's doing is he gets food, right? And then he was trying to order more food on his phone, like using the mobile app. So he pulls his mask down to unlock his phone. And this guy, Wilbur, who was the usher, comes over and says, "Sir, you got to put your mask up." Now, I just would have been like, "Oh, okay, sorry," right? And unlock the phone a different way. But my pal Scott starts arguing back with him like, "Well, how am I supposed to unlock my phone if I can't see my face?" And I'm seeing like what's going on. I try to intercede there. There's another example of like over-corporating the situation. Again, that's not the Flyers, but here's this poor guy. Like, there's only 3,000 people in there to begin with. They're putting a thing in your seat that says order food from your seat, and you can't even pull your mask down for a minute to unlock your phone? Well, it's a little too vigilant.
You could unlock it in another fashion.
Yeah, but that was very vigilant, Now on the flip side of things, I saw a guy, and the whole mask thing, I saw a guy who had the mask covering his mouth and not his nose, and was just having a nice old long conversation with his buddies, and that's where they came over and said like, "Hey, you gotta." But see, the one that got me, Gill, was then on the second intermission, we went out to the concourse, we got some food, got a beverage, and we were going to stand there on the concourse because that's half the thing too. You don't want to sit in your seat the entire intermission. You want to people watch a little bit. Let's see who's walking by. And some lady beelines it up to us and says, "Nope, you can't be out here. You got to go back to your seat." And that got the PT a little chapped. I was like, to bleep with
just hang on the concourse.
You cannot hang on the concourse. You can go and get your food, you can get your drink, you can do whatever you do, but you got to go back and eat it in your seat. Did you know about the seat covers too? Did we talk about that?
No, I haven't been to somebody said to me, when was the last time you had a game? I can't even remember.
So the seat covers, I noticed this, and I noticed it more in person, but it was funny. When the Flyers first opened up the building or the Sixers first came back, they were putting yellow seat covers on to sort of designate, like, this is the seat you can sit in, this is the one, you can't sit in these, right? So it says, like, please sit here, okay? And the seat covers, when they first did it, were bright yellow. Well, quickly they realized, oh, crap, these are yellow, and you can really see how many empty seats they are. So all of a sudden, magically, they changed.
I'm imagining they didn't think that they weren't going to be able to sell out for 3,500 people.
Right. They thought that have no problem. But yes, they quickly realized that they weren't selling out and that they were seeing big pockets of these seat covers. So that's an example. You know what? That's a great example of a corporate decision instead of a decision that's made with brains. It's made in some boardroom. Like, yeah, we're going to order these seat covers that say, please sit here. And they're going to be yellow and easy to spot. And then all of a sudden they get a couple games and go, cheapies. You can totally see that people aren't here. And they changed them to black with white writing. I should have taken a picture of that so you could really see it. But next time I go up, I don't know when I go up, but I'll get somebody to take a picture of it for you so you can see how funny it is. These seat covers that say, please sit here.
All right, Tuesday with Thompson. Pete Thompson's here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. Yeah, it was, the deadline, it was kind of a stinker. Not that I thought they were going to trade Claude Giroux or Voracek or anybody of value for that matter, but it's just this feeling of when Durso said that, it was like, you know what? That's the part that really stuck with me is that
It's corporate.
Right.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
And even the guys that they moved, Mike, remember, they're responsible for some of that salary, too. Like Michael Raffle goes to Washington for a 5th-round pick, right? The Flyers have to pay 25% of that salary on a prorated basis.
Absolutely.
Eric Gustafson for the 7th-round pick. Flyers get half of that $3 million salary, right? I mean, so it's not only were they making moves, but they're making the moves that, they still have to sort of pay for their mistake.
Yeah. All right. So there was one other thing that I had jotted down that I wanted to get into. I can't even oh, you know who's coming up after you?
Who?
Doug Glanville.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Doug Glanville. He's first of all, anybody that went to Penn is smarter than somebody like you and me that went to Temple or West Virginia, right? So Doug Glanville's the man. And secondly, I think he's got great baseball insight and analysis. I hope you're going to ask him about Philly center field problems.
I will. By the way, that's what I wanted to tell you. So you and I had breakfast about a month ago. I went back to that place.
Good. I like to hear that. Yes. That was the one that we had on the Saturday out, kind of outside your comfort zone you're talking about.
Yeah, we happened to be out there. Not outside my comfort zone. I just don't live near there.
Right. Now, that's a wonderful breakfast place. I would absolutely go back there. I found a place out here in Galloway near me that I've been frequenting. So we did. In fact, it wasn't the warmest, but the guy that I was with is a little more COVID worried than I am. So I would have eaten inside, but he was like, hey, let's eat outside. So we actually ate outside. I guess that was Sunday. Yeah, Sunday morning.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
But I'll do breakfast with you again. Listen, I was going to do lunch with you and your dad.
Yeah, my dad texted me, and he's ready to get back out there.
Yeah, but now you're going to have to wait. Now you're going to have to wait till June or until I have like an in-service day or something.
Yeah, well, because you can start to get outside again.
Yeah. So I'm fine with that. I would do that.
Yeah. All right.
But I guess I'm going to talk to you Friday for happy hour first.
Absolutely. We're getting close to the draft, so I want to get that. Did you read that athletic story?
Let me tell you about that athletic story. So most of the time I read the athletic stories on my phone, but in this case, I happen to be on my laptop like I am now doing the segment with you.
Yeah, I happen to be on something else.
No. I'm just saying I happen to read it on my phone. In this case, I was reading it on my laptop, and I made the font a little bit bigger, and I'm reading it. And it felt like I had read the story before, but maybe that's only because Jeff McClain did like sort of the
variations of this.
Right, he did the Cliff Notes version. What those guys did on the Athletic, man, that's the whole book. I mean, that was deep. That was a deep dive into the dysfunctionality that's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, but okay. And I say, I agree with that. There's dysfunction. But I feel like that's going on in sports in general, is that you have this divide between the analytics department and the football guy department, and they don't respect each other's opinions. They don't respect each other's views, and they can't get along. I don't think that's an Eagles problem. I think that's a sports problem.
I would agree with that. And also, obviously in college basketball, kids are leaving record numbers in the transfer portal. In the NFL, every quarterback, all of a sudden, when did the NFL become the place that you don't sign a contract and try to honor your contract, right? Everybody wants to get out of their contract now. Oh, if Stafford could do it, we could do it, right? Like everybody wants to get out of their contract now. So, I mean, you're right. That would be a sports in general problem. But boy, oh boy, Gill, I know you. Like if you had to go meet with your boss every Tuesday and recap some of the decisions that you made in your show and feel ridiculed, and then you said, well, I want to hire this guy. Josh is doing too much work. I want to hire this guy to help out. And they're like, no. In fact, you got to get rid of this guy. And you're like, wait, but I already told him he's coming back. I mean, like all the stories that Peterson had to go through, you start thinking, oh my God, what is the connect between Roseman and Jeff Lurie that gives Roseman Teflon authority to do whatever the heck he wants?
Wish we knew. A couple quick things real fast. I got about a minute.
Hit me.
12 years ago today. Do you know?
12 years ago today, April 13th, 12 years ago today. Is that a Roy Halladay thing?
Harry Cow has passed.
Oh, damn. I knew it was the Phillies, but I didn't know what it was.
50 years ago Saturday. Past Saturday.
50 years ago, last Saturday.
Yep.
Give me the sport.
Baseball, football.
Baseball, football, 50 years ago, baseball, football. I don't know. What is it?
First game at the Vet.
Oh, yeah. Now that one's awesome. Yeah. And the first hit by the Phillies, or first ever hit at the Vet, was by. If you're going to throw them at me, I got to throw them back at you.
Was it Larry Boa?
That is correct. Larry Boa. Yeah.
All right, there you go.
That was fun. Thanks.
I remember being on the air when I learned about Harry Kalas. I had a different producer at the time. If you know that producer,
I do.
The little things he didn't give a crap about, like, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? But when something major happened,
he locked in.
He was very good.
I was on the air with you that day. When Harry passed, you had me on that day.
And I remember that day because it was something major, and he was very good when something major happened. And I mean, the amount of people he got on to talk about Harry was overwhelming almost, about how good I thought we covered that. And I can't believe it's been 12 years since that happened.
Yeah, I miss HK, man. He was the best. He was the best.
All right, Doug Glanville is going to talk baseball with me coming up next. Peter, I will talk to you Friday.
Michael, looking forward to it. Take care, buddy.
I want you to clear May 1st on your calendar.
All right, May 1st.
May 1st.
Yeah, what time of May 1st?
All day.
Okay, May 1st, clear the whole day. Do I get to find out why, or?
Yeah, you can text me.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Sports Bash Live, 97 Tuesday with Thompson here on Sports Bash. We have fun.
I get to find out, not the audience.
Happy Hour Fridays on the Friday show. He'll be back then. And coming up next, Doug Glanville. We're going to talk baseball with Doug Glanville. We'll talk a little Phils, but baseball with Doug Glanville is coming up next. Don't go away. progress as they have a doubleheader, and the Phillies and the Mets playing a 4-game set. We'll talk a little bit about that. The National League has gotten off to an interesting start. We're going to do that now with ESPN Major League Baseball analyst Doug Glanville, of course, a former Philly as well. And tonight, ESPN is commemorating the life and legacy of Jackie Robinson with this Major League Baseball doubleheader. Doug Glanville will be on the call. And a big part of today's coverage for the 9:45 Reds-Giants game. That Phillies-Mets game is the first part of that. And Doug joins us now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Doug, it's good to have you back, man. How you been?
All right. Always doing well, revisiting Jersey, my Jersey roots, and but I can't complain, man. I'm thankful.
Yeah, I know today is a very special day in Major League Baseball, and Jackie Robinson on the MLB doubleheader. You guys are going to be talking a lot about this, but I'd love to kind of hear the impact that Jackie not only had on you, but just the game of baseball. I think sometimes that gets lost in the sauce of how impactful today's game looks, thanks to Jackie Robinson and what he did.
Yeah, well, no question. Personally, he's someone really close to me. I got to read stories and books on him at a young age, and because I loved the game as soon as I could walk, it was an important story. My parents, my mom was an educator, retired now, and my dad was from Trinidad and Tobago. So, just to get his story and see how it applied to my family, and just having the vision for what was possible and the doors that he was trying to open, that was a fantastic, sort of jumping off point for me and my connection to the game. So, family, I kind of think of that. And then you also look at his just excitement as a player. I didn't have the luxury of watching him live or other than video, but when it all was said and done, his numbers, MVP, Rookie of the Year, world champion, and having a, over 60 wins above replacement WAR, which made him one of the most dominant players of his time and one of the great 9-year stretches in baseball history. He was a great player, and he did it when he was 28 when he came up. So he was kind of already in his prime and going on the downhill side of that. So outside, just the fact that he was able to do all this and confront so many challenges that our country were facing, some of it in hate and some of it in hope. And it was a challenging time, and he still rose above and just did great things on and off the field.
Yeah, Doug, I'd love to hear from you. Growing up in Jersey, North Jersey, so it's a very populated area up there. What kind of drove you to get into playing baseball at a young age? When was that kind of like, hey, I'm going to play baseball?
I have to thank my brother for that. I have an older brother who's about 8 years older, and he mapped up my baseball life as soon as I could walk. I mean, he had it written down. I played games like Stratomatic baseball, I had wiffle ball, and we were always outside. And he couldn't wait till I was old enough to hold the bat. So he loved it. And my dad, being from Trinidad, loved cricket, so it kind of translated fairly well. And we were outside playing all the time, wiffle ball, stickball, neighborhood. I lived in a cul-de-sac too, so there was no cars, no traffic, so I could do it all day. So that's kind of where it sort of kicked off for me. And so when I really connected with the sport early on, I did the usual routes, right, little league all the way up, and just loved the game. And even if I wasn't playing, I was in the off season playing Strat and Stratomatic and simulated games and video games, any way I could kind of digest it. And the other part of it, my mom is a math teacher, so I loved the numbers. The numbers became a big part of what I enjoyed about it. So the stats and how to make a lineup, it was just every aspect of the game I loved. And now my great appreciation for it is just the storytelling. Telling the story, as you mentioned, Jackie Robinson, and bringing him to life in 2021, and just seeing how much this is a game that kind of gives you that passion through the slow work of how it delivers its stories to you. So I'm very fortunate. I'm still working in the game at 50 years old, despite having a whole career and being retired for almost 15 years. So I feel very grateful for that.
Yeah, and I know you look around the baseball today. There's players from all sorts of backgrounds, but we always talk about these young kids and are they playing baseball? I feel like your story is a very unique one. I was having the same conversation, Doug, we were watching the Phillies game on Sunday night against the Braves, and I'm saying that was an exciting game. You had home runs, you had defensive plays, you had a play at the plate, and yet I don't know that kids are getting drawn in by that, what you and I like. I said, well, what makes that game really cool is that I'm watching the game in the 6th inning, and I'm thinking about what's going on in the 8th inning. And they looked at me like, huh? And I was like, that's why I love baseball. It's hard to kind of describe that to someone who's just sitting there watching the game and doesn't get that.
Yeah, and it takes a certain kind of patience, and we're not a very patient society these days, and things are more about kind of speed. And when you don't have a lot of action, which is certainly something baseball is grappling with, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks, a lot of home runs, and you don't really get that middle ground. What you and I talking about hitting runs and stolen bases and triples and moving runners, and you just don't have as much of that anymore because it's much more, it's geared towards the power of the game. And it's been oversold to a certain degree. Yeah, it's like, oh, I want to see home runs. And now it's just like, oh, whatever. It's not a big deal anymore. And you're missing the fact that there are some great athletes on the field that can do so much and cover a lot of ground, but there's no ball put in play for 8 minutes. And it's just hard to celebrate that at a certain point. You have to find ways to create action. So that's what's, a different thing. I mean, I could wear the get off my lawn hat, and yeah, I love starting pitchers back in the day that went 8 innings. And, I grew up as a Philly fan with Steve Carlton, right? He's just good for 9. That was just what you did. And, now guys go 2 1/3 and 3, and then you have like 12 guys to, close out the game. It's different. And, there's so much talent on the field, so much more talent on the field, that you're trying to balance that out with the strategic, slow aspect of the game. And I know baseball is trying to figure it out.
Doug Glanville's our guest, ESPN. You once wrote a book called The Game from Where I Stand, and I'd like to, that was about 10, 11 years ago. Is the game standing in a different position from when you wrote that book?
A lot of it still holds because it was so much about behind the scenes and the relationships. And that's what I still, love about the game, that you saw those dynamics of a locker room and a clubhouse. I think what's different outside of just how the data is so real time now, and it just plays right away in the algorithm of running a bullpen. And, there's a whole another chapter certainly to add about that. And I think the other component of it is how much sport has engaged a lot on social issues. I mean, certainly there was a time we mentioned with Jackie Robinson, but then there was kind of a quiet 90s and maybe 70s, Michael Jordan era kind of period. And now you're seeing a lot more engagement on athletes that are talking about history and, sort of expressing, certain ways that they want the game or sport to lead to bring us together. And so that's different. I came up in the Cubs system, and I was a young guy with a bunch of old heads like Randy Myers. And I didn't say a lot. I didn't feel like I could say much about anything. I kind of followed. Sean Dunston was kind of a mentor, but it was more of a time of watching and listening and not speaking much. And I think that's different now, where players are coming up feeling like, hey, I'm here, and I don't care if I'm 20 or 30. I have something to say and to do. And they're trying to get more informed. And part of that information is what happened before. And Jackie Robinson certainly is a huge part of that.
Glad you brought that up. Doug Glanville's with us, commemorating the life and legacy of Jackie Robinson during tonight's Major League Baseball doubleheader. I implore many of you to just watch the coverage. Doug will be a big part of that all day long. Phillies, Mets, 7 o'clock. Reds and Giants is where you will hear Doug at 9:45. That is the late game tonight. Speaking of the teams involved, let's take a look at them. Your former team, the Phillies, first place in the East. And one of the big reasons, Doug, is it's a better bullpen. And I wonder, last year that bullpen was so bad, and yet they were historically bad, and they had a shot to make the playoffs. Is simply having a average bullpen good enough for the Phillies to be a playoff contender?
Yeah, I mean, you had nowhere to go but up from last year. I mean, that was just really epically horrendous, and they struggled. They knew it, and they're trying to rectify. And some of it's just the small sample size and the challenge that you faced there. But now, yeah, I mean, I think with an average bullpen or a little above, they're going to be a different team. And Joe Girardi's had a lot of success in his career, so I don't hold anything past him. The talent is absolutely there. So I say that they keep pitching, and especially in a year where a lot more weight is going to be placed on the bullpen, because you're not sure how deep pitchers are going to go in games, given that you got a short season and now you're thrust back into 162 games. There's a lot of uncertainty about what starters are going to do, and bullpens are going to be play even a greater role, I think, in how they have success in 2021.
You'll call the Reds tonight, and this is a team that I think if you're a casual baseball fan, you might not roll them off your tongue and say, this is an offensive juggernaut here. 7-3. They've got off to a fast start, but 69 runs, which is the best in the majors. So this is a fun team you're going to see tonight.
Absolutely. And look, last season, they grossly underachieved, and they still made the playoffs because they had the great pitching with Bauer and all that. But in 2021, their offense really is just getting back to what they're capable of. They were always a really good offensive team. I mean, Votto's getting older, but they have a lot of firepower. And right now, they're getting contributions from pretty much everyone. So, yeah, definitely watch out for the Reds. They can score. And, they have some talent in their pick side. Sonny Gray's coming back, and Castillo struggled, but will be good. So I'd watch out for these cats. They're tough.
No doubt. They're fun to watch. They put up a lot of runs. They'll be the night game tonight. I want to ask you, Doug, because you played, and it kind of ties into what's going on in Philadelphia here. They brought in Dave Dombrowski. They had a change in the organization. You played in Chicago. You played in Philadelphia. You played in Texas. You went back to the Cubs. You went back to the Phillies. How when people talk about the top down and success, how evident is that to a player that you can tell that a team has a change simply based on a change in a GM or a change at the managerial position?
It certainly matters, because you're thinking about the culture of the team. And there are times where you make changes physically, you change, players, you trade for people. And then there's times where you're just looking for a cultural shift. So that can matter, and it can make a big difference. And I know going into spring training every year, it's always a good feeling when there's a commitment from the top saying, hey, we're trying to win. We're going to make moves. We're going to trade. I remember one year we weren't sure, even as a team, we were kind of in it with Larry Boa, and we were like, what moves are we going to make? And then they did make some big moves to say, all right, we're going to try to win this. And I think one of the years we brought in Turk Wendell and Dennis Cook, just trying to say, okay, we're going to bolster this bullpen. So that is a huge indicator to you of whether they're sort of saying, okay, we're kind of rebuilding and see what happens, or we're going to do everything we can in our power to bring in talent as we need it, or increase our depth to make sure that we compete from beginning to end.
Those were some names right there. Turk Wendell was an interesting cat, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, with the shark tooth necklace and the black socks, or if he wore socks at all. So yeah, Turk was a character.
He sure was. Baseball is a game of characters. Doug Glanville is one of the good ones in the game. A local guy, University of Penn, played at with the Phillies, had a couple stints with the Phillies. So it's good to catch up with you, and we'll be a part of the broadcast tonight for ESPN's commemorating the life and legacy of Jackie Robinson. They have the doubleheader with the Phillies and the Mets. And then, of course, that game tonight, the Reds and the Giants that he touched on. He will be a part of that coverage and an integral part of all the day's coverage, as it should be a real fun, special day. Doug Glanville, it's been great kind of catching up to you, talking a little baseball, having someone that understands the game and says, hey, I'm watching 2 innings ahead. I like to have someone like that every once in a while. You don't see those guys too often. But, Doug, we always appreciate your time, man.
All right, man. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Doug Glanville, everybody, here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Phillies and the Mets, of course, that game, the double dip, and Doug will be a part of that coverage. He played with the Phillies, of course, from 98 to 2002, and then came back in 2004, had a little run with the Fightins. Always a good baseball guy, Doug Glanville, here on the Sports Bash. All right, we'll close the stuff out tonight with the sound of the day. I had good guests, Frank Klose, Kevin Kinkead, Andrew DiCecco. Jake Fischer was outstanding, by the way, on that book. That was really fun. So we'll have that coming up. All right, I can dig it. Here we go. Time for 5 questions to wrap up the show. That wasn't supposed to rhyme, but it kind of did. Here we go. All right, here we go. This is what we got today. Sounds of the day, our favorite guest of the day, and what they said. How about this? Jake Fischer. He wrote a book on the tanking problem that the NBA has right now, but he said the original plan for the Sixers was not to do it.
They originally were going to try and bounce back quicker than anticipated, but I think the plan with people it gets misconstrued. Hinkie wasn't always just going to draft injured players. The plan, like we talked about, it gets changed. There's luck involved. It just so happened that Joel Embiid fell to them at 3 the year after they took their own Joel. And we all can look back right now. Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker went 1 and 2. Other guys on top of that class. The reason the Sixers are even being asked by you, Mike, as the best case scenario of this tanking era is because they got Joel Embiid.
So I guess the question really is the juice worth the squeeze?
I think the juice is worth the squeeze, but I thought what he said was interesting was this wasn't always Sam's plan.
Well,
and
anybody with half a brain knew that.
Well, no, that's not true because a lot of people were diluted and convinced and manipulated into thinking it wasn't true.
Well, that's why I said anybody with half a brain knew it. People who don't think for themselves think that, well, he just wanted to keep getting injured guys and he just wanted to keep tanking. That's preposterous.
You understand that because you understand the full picture, but there's a lot of people don't have all the information, and now more information is coming out years later. And I think that it's still an issue. There's a lot of people who still think that Hinkie was doing one thing when he was actually doing something else. Well, I think that you got to keep reminding people.
Yeah, the intention was to never keep losing. They wanted to find They wanted to find what Joel Embiid has become, a player that could be the best player in the league, the
that
MVP.
Was the Hinkie plan.
Yes, it wasn't.
It wasn't specifically tanking. It was to find a superstar through the draft. That was the plan.
Yes, it was. And I think if Embiid had not gotten injured and missed 2 seasons, everything would have happened faster. The problem was Embiid got hurt, missed 2 years, and that pushed everything back.
Right. Of course, then you might not have ended up with a couple other players along the way. But.
Well, it actually, in the end, it kind of worked out for them that they lost a couple of, really, they lost for about 2.5 years.
Right.
The 1 year that they started the whole process, that team wasn't very good to begin with. They started, if you remember, with that group of guys together. That team stunk, so Hinkie started to trade them. Right. They had Evan Turner and Spencer Hawes and Thaddeus Young all on that team. So they didn't start the season by trying to lose.
No.
They just said, all right, I'll give you a chance. And if you're not any good at the trade deadline, I'm going to move you.
And voila.
And that's what ended up happening. So then you could say the next 2 years, they tanked. And then the third year after that, Embiid started to play. They were actually pretty good, and then Embiid got hurt. So really 2.5 years was how long they lost. And people act like it was a 10-year process. It hasn't even been 10 years since they made the trade originally. All right, Josh is up next. Kevin Durso is coming up. The Flyers play tonight against the Capitals. Stick around.